Okay, welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to Somerset Planning North Committee. It's 2 o'clock, so time to start. I'm Councillor Cathy Pearce, Chair of the committee, and Councillor Matt Martin is Vice Chair and sitting to my right. Before we get onto the agenda, I'll do the usual housekeeping this afternoon. So if the alarms do go off, it's for real. And please make your way out of the double doors on your left through reception into King Square. There are toilets in reception as well, should you need them. And there's plenty of water over in the table to your left. Please make use of that if you feel you need to. Just to let you know, we have asked for the air conditioning to be cooled down just a little bit because it was feeling a bit warm in here. So the meeting today is a hybrid meeting, and that means that committee members are present here in Bridgewater House, and the meeting is also available online via Teams. Members of the public and other councillors can take part virtually. However, only councillors who are present in the room are able to vote on the applications before us. Then I remind all those in the room to turn off your mobile phones or to put them onto silent, please. And those joining online, please turn off your cameras and microphones so that the meeting isn't disturbed. And please note that this meeting is being recorded. I'll now introduce those taking part in the committee today. So to my left are the officers from our legal and democratic teams, and to my right are the planning officers who will present the applications before us today. Also joining us are officers from Planning Policy and Somerset Highways. So the format of today's meeting will be as per the published agenda, and a copy of the officers' reports can be found on the council website. Each application will be taken in turn. So officers will outline each application, followed by public speaking time. Only members of the public who have registered to speak can make representation to the committee, and councillors around the table will then debate and decide on each application. So during the debate, there will be a proposer and a seconder for a resolution. Members will vote on the proposal. Only members who have been present throughout the whole application being considered will be able to vote. And the voting options are for, against, and abstain. Votes will then be counted and the results announced. So that's the welcome and housekeeping. I'll now go back to the main agenda. So first of all, we have apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Smedley and Councillor Bradford. Councillor Clayton is subbing for Councillor Bradford. Apologies, Councillor Ham.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Just to state that I requested item 6 to be referred.
Thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Slocum.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm part of the Town Council, but I've taken no part in any discussions on planning.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Just the general one in terms of membership of the Internal Drainage Board. So remember that, but taking no part in their discussions.
Thank you. Ms. Lehman, are there any other points you'd like to make before? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Clayton. Sorry.
Okay, it should be noted, I'm Councillor Filmer and Ashgrove Drainage Board. No part in any discussions.
Thank you. Councillor Clayton.
Ashgrove Drainage Board again, Burnham Hove Town Council, but I've not taken part in anything on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ham. With reference to Council. Thank you.
Councillor Ham, this matter's not before the committee today, is it?
No, I didn't know.
So there's no interest in this respect. And in respect of Councillor Martin, as you referred the matter, can you confirm that you are at the committee today keeping an open mind and listening to all the arguments that are presented today on this matter before you cast your vote.
Yes, that's true, and I haven't taken part in any previous discussions on the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no more declarations of interest, I'll move on to public question time. There are a number of members of the public who have registered to speak, and I'll just call you forward to the table in front of us here when we are discussing that particular application. So I'll call each person then. So now we go on to the applications, and the first page, page 13. And so this is the Habitats Regulation Assessment in relation to agenda item 5, land at Coombatch, Wedmore. Mr. Freeze, would you like to talk us through the Habitats Regulation Assessment, please?
So this is a habitats regulation assessment, the hybrid application that's coming before members after this agenda item. So we have to decide the HRA before you can hear the planning application. The application covers land at Coombatch, Wedmore in Somerset, and the application is full consent for 26 dwellings, formation of access, open space, landscaping and parking, and outline planning permission for 4 self-builds. So as a habitats regulation, it does need resolution before we get onto the planning application, but I'll come through that in a second. So this slide just shows the outline of the site in red, the settlement boundary for the village in green, and the conservation area, just for point of interest, is shown hatched purple on this slide. So under regulation 9 for the habitat regulations, there's a requirement to assess any site that may result in an impact on a designated site or species. So through this assessment, there's 5 stages. So just covering these off quickly. So the first is to consider if the proposal is likely to have a significant effect on a European site or its features. So if carry out an appropriate assessment, that then takes you on to stage 2. This then looks at the conservation objectives for that site. So what is that site sort of protected for? What's the benefits of that site? It looks at the potential effects of the development and whether these could be mitigated or not. Provided that there's no adverse effect, the development can then proceed. At stage 3, it considers that if there is an adverse impact, which cannot be demonstrated, if an adverse impact cannot be demonstrated, consideration is then given as to whether there's an alternative to the proposal that could be delivered without giving rise to the same adverse impact. And stage 4, if there isn't an alternative to the proposal, is there an overriding public interest, or is there compensatory measures that could be implied, which would then be stage 5. So it would need to be ensured that any compensatory measures in themselves do not result in a negative effect on the network of European sites as a whole. So in respect of this application, Habitats Regulation Assessment, HRA, was undertaken and is attached as an appendix to the officer report that's in the agenda pack that's been circulated ahead of the meeting. So the HRA confirms that the site is located in the North Somerset Mendip Backs Special Area of Conservation, the Mendip Woodlands Special Area of Conservation, and the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar and Special Protection Area. So given the location of the site and the designations, an appropriate assessment under stage 2 was considered to be required. So whilst the proposal was not considered to result in any direct impact on the Mendip Woodlands SAC or the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar and Spa site, there would, as part of the development, be a loss of foraging habitat and impact on polite structures as a result of lighting and sort of breaks in hedgerows, which was considered to impact on the activities of both the species of horseshoe bats, which are known in this area. So then, given that there is an impact, mitigation is then considered in terms of what could be provided to accommodate for that change. So mitigation measures were considered to be required and are proposed in respect of appropriate replacement habitat. So as part of the proposal, there is an alternative site, which is 2.5 hectares in size, and has been located at Rug Hill. It's proposed by the applicant and will be secured through Section 106. There is required to be a landscape and ecological management plan in connection with that off-site mitigation to ensure that adequate replacement habitat is provided and maintained in the future, which again would be secured through the legal agreement, the planning application if accepted. Within the development itself, there's also a need to ensure that lighting is appropriately designed to avoid any potential effects from light spill, including through the construction stage. So again, there is a condition that's proposed as part of the planning permission in the event that it's granted to minimise direct impact on bats as a result of the development. So in terms of the alternative site, so this is the alternative 2.5 hectares that's proposed as sort of off-site mitigation to accommodate for the loss of habitat and foraging area for bats. Again, this plan would be secured as part of a legal agreement in the event that the consent is passed, but it shows off-site habitat mitigation, including provision of some woodland to the bottom, 2 ponds and an area of grassland. And the site is located, members can see it very clearly, in this top hand corner. So there's Crickham here and Cocklake here, so it's just this land of parcel in between the two areas. So subject to that mitigation, the Somerset.
Like the way that they sort of, when they were, as they were developing like computer generated like animations, right, or computer whatever computer animations, like they were using different like the subjects of the film were based on what is either technologically possible or.
Can you ensure your mic is on mute, please? Thank you. So, subject to the mitigation proposed by the ecologist and Natural England, they have confirmed they're satisfied that the mitigation is acceptable in respect to the HRA, and therefore it's recommended that the HRA, with its recommendations, is endorsed by the planning committee as competent authority. So a decision needs to be made on the HRA before you can consider the planning application, because if members do not agree that the mitigation is satisfactory, then there's an adverse impact on a designated area. So we wouldn't then proceed with considering the planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding the HRA? Councillor Munt.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on page 25. When they're saying they're actually recording the bat activity, they're using equipment that they say is poor at recording bat activity. Is that just because there's not good enough equipment available, or what's? Yeah, would you explain why?
That's fine. On page 25, there is a table that looks at static detector deployment. With all electrical devices trying to catch the natural wildlife doing what the natural wildlife does, there's a degree of error in any of those things. So one of the things they do is they do it over a series of dates and times to try and get an average as to what you would expect to see come through those areas. So whilst it accepts there's a degree of error in the sort of capture, if you like, of the information, for the degree and the frequency that was undertaken, the ecologist was satisfied that we had enough information to make that assessment.
Just one more. The land up at Rug Hill, that's, just to clarify, that's already a greenfield site, and that's going to be improved to something else. Is that right? Or I just don't want to make sure that we're not taking something that's already habitat and saying it's going to be developed into habitat, and actually there's no purpose to do that.
Yeah. On page 41, basically, as part of the habitats assessment, what they have to do is look at the baseline value of any site that they put forward. So it would have had a baseline value of X. the degree of mitigation that's required as part of the impact is 1.49 hectares. The site overall is 2.5 hectares. But obviously, it has a baseline value, but it had quite a low baseline value. So the mitigation that's proposed on the site in terms of the areas indicated on this plan, plus the landscaping and mitigation that's provided as part of the site, is sufficient to make up the 1.49 deficit. So whilst it's a 2.5 hectare site, it's a 1.49 mitigation value.
Sorry, if I could just clarify then, that land is going to be held by which body, who manages that and who owns it?
So the second point of the recommendation was the landscape ecological. I need a new mark. Sorry. The one next to you. Going really well so far. So the second requirement for the landscape ecological management plan is a requirement for, a landscape ecological management plan for that site. In terms of who runs it and who's going to be responsible for it, that's all secured through the legal agreement. So in the legal agreement, this land parcel and the relevant landowner of this land parcel will be tied up into the legal obligations for the Section 106. Part of that is providing a landscape and ecological management plan for this site to make sure it delivers the amount of mitigation that we're accepting in terms of the offset for this site. So all of that's tied up in a legal agreement.
Sorry, I presume that as part of those kind of legal agreements, it's usual that would be protected from any further development.
Yeah. Yeah, as part of the 106. In terms of who actually manages it, that's down to the developer to propose a management system or scheme that we would sign off on. So if we're not happy with it, we wouldn't accept it. But we don't have those details at this point, but it would be a requirement.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Dawn, can I just confirm that management plan that comes in agreement with legal on the land that we're having as offset here, is that to be managed in perpetuity? And that's, is there, I know that 106 and conditions can be varied in the future, but is there such a way of not allowing that to happen?
They can always apply to vary it, but the reason for imposing it in the first place wouldn't have left. So, you know, I would say they could apply to vary it, but we would reject it because there is a valid reason, unless there's something that supersedes its requirement. But I don't know if Dawn Newman wants to maybe clarify.
Yes, in the section 106, there will be transfer provisions to the provisions will be restricted to the use as habitat land. So that would always be a restriction on the actual conveyance of the land itself. Forever.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'd be looking for a proposer and seconder to accept the habitat regulation assessment or not. Councillor Bolt.
Maybe a bit closer.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yes, I'm
Councillor
having a second.
Thank you. All those in favour of the proposal to accept the HRA before us, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. Thank you. Any against? Thank you. That is carried. Thank you. So in that case, we go on to agenda item 5, which is the planning application in relation to land at Coombatch Wedmore. Mr. Freese, would you like to present the application for us, please?
Lovely, thank you very much. So now that we've determined the HRA, this is the application proper. So the application is a hybrid application, so it's part in full and part in outline. So full consent is sought for 26 dwellings. An outline permission is sought for the 4 self-build plots. The application has been subject to a number of revisions and a reduction in the scheme, but this is before members as there remains parish council objection as set out in full in the report. The objection raises concern in terms of principle, raises concern in terms of the housing needs assessment, particularly given the other developments that are in the area. Concern regarding the self-build plots being relied on as affordable housing, conflict of the proposal with the adopted neighbourhood plan and the local plan, and lack of facilities, highway safety and impact on heritage and ecology. So the main considerations, these are set out within the publication of the report, but just the members sort of understanding, and this is the route we're going to take through the presentation as well. It's just principle of development, looking at housing needs assessment, size scale design, landscape character, place space, impact on adjoining properties and heritage assets, highway considerations, ecology, surface water drainage, and then sustainability and renewables. So this slide just shows the outline of the site in red, conservation area shown in purple, which is on the opposite side of Wells Road, opposite site. The settlement boundary is shown as the green line running along Coombe Lane to the northwest of the site and along Wells Road to the south of the site. So the site, the application site itself lies outside of the settlement boundary, but clearly well related with two of the boundaries adjoining it. So this just shows basically the same sort of view, but an aerial view of the site. So this is Coombe Lane down here, Wells Road across the front here. So the application site is this sort of wedge shape here, and this square at the front. Here, so you can see there's a number of residential properties on this side of the road, and then there's further cluster of residential properties towards the bottom here, but they are more spaced and slightly different character. And this is an orchard area that members will see back in photographs as we run through the site. This site up here was a site under construction at the time that Google aerial views have done this map, but it's now complete. So looking at policy T2A, it does set out criteria for minimum growth and includes criteria based for releasing sites outside of the settlement. So beyond this level, there is also policy T2B, which can ask consideration of further sites outside of, but well related to the settlement boundaries, where there remains an unmet local affordable housing need. The kind of criteria in the policy is set out in this slide, and we will come to it throughout the presentation. So there's been a lot of local objection about the conflict of this development with WED3, so WED 3, which supports the provision of affordable housing in accordance with the local plan. The policy sets out the requirement for the development under T2B, which is the policy we're looking at for this development, to have regard to the site assessment evidence, which was prepared as part of the adoption of the neighbourhood plan prior to its adoption. This site was promoted at that time, and I will come on to that shortly. So this policy also requires the tenure split, so the nature of affordable housing, to reflect the Wedmore Housing Needs Assessment or subsequently updated evidence. So the site was considered for allocation and rejected through the neighbourhood plan, as other promoted sites were considered to be more suitable. This site on this table was actually W003 is this site. It was scored on a matrix, which was considered a good indicator and showed negative red rating on landscape, proximity to facilities and public transport, and limitations in terms of walking and cycling. The site was marked as a possible, so amber, in terms of proximity to the settlement boundary, vehicular access, public right of way and historic environment. And the principle of the site was considered to be positive in terms of size, pollution, contamination, ground conditions and access to mains drainage. So a number of the sites considered through the site assessment, as you can see on this thing, were inside the settlement boundary. So therefore by default considered to be more sustainable, more suitable for development. And this site was rejected as part of the neighbourhood plan because of the reds and the ambers. So in addition to the matrix scoring system, a qualitative assessment was done on the site, which was undertaken above, and concluded that the site should be discounted on access and safety grounds. So whilst these weren't red items at the time, they did raise significant concerns beyond the matrix. All of the above points are material and constraint based in relation to the site, and details of the application, details as part of the application have sought to address these impacts. So if members are satisfied that the proposal manages to address the conflicts, then there wouldn't be a conflict with WED 3, as the development has considered the site assessment and has sought to address the constraints in detail. If members are not satisfied with the amendments, then obviously WED 3 can be taken as a potential concern. So in terms of the housing needs assessment, so the application was originally submitted in 2020 and referenced the housing needs assessment, housing needs survey for 2018. So the development of this site was originally proposed for 34 dwellings, which suggested 4 one-bed units, 4 two-bed units, 2 three-bed properties, a shared ownership or affordable rent, and 1 3-bed self-build and 1 4-bed self-build as affordable. It was confirmed that with the developer that self-build dwellings would not be considered affordable in respect of policy T2B, which does require 40% of the affordable, the site to be affordable relative to the market dwellings. So given other developments in the area that were previously identified, need was considered to have been accommodated for, and a revised housing need was undertaken end of last year. So any MS were commissioned by the developer to undertake a housing needs assessment, which had 96 responses. So of these, 82 were considered to either be able to meet their own housing needs assessment or did not provide sufficient information to establish a need. So of the respondents, only 14 were considered to be in housing need with a requirement to move in the next 5 years. And they were also identified to qualify for affordable or social rent. So the need identified by these households are set in bold on the bottom, and these match the affordable housing accommodation proposed as part of this submission. So the principle and scale of development is therefore considered to be acceptable in accordance to T2B, subject to the detailed considerations, which I will now come on to. So this slide shows the original layout for the site, which detailed a gable end on plot 3. So that's this one here. There's a couple of listed buildings on this side of the road. So this is a gable end quite close to the conservation area and the listed buildings. And there was quite a hard frontage of affordable dwellings. So that's these ones over here, sort of quite close and quite clustered together. And the proximity of those units to the hedge that is proposed to be translocated could have also resulted in an impact on the amenity. There was a rear parking courtyard, which is not particularly characteristic of the area, and the built form of development on the northern boundary was considered to show minimal gapping that would have appeared quite dense relative to the surrounding area. So parking courtyard is in this area here, and then this was the quite dense development due to sort of all these outbuildings and garages that have gone in. The blue area shown at the bottom, they're the self-build plots, and they are in outline as part of this application. And this white area here is the orchard that we've shown members as part of the previous slide. So this is an elevated view of the site from a public right of way that runs from the field immediately to the rear of the properties on Mill Lane. So once you pass the hedge boundary to the east, the landscaping as part of that boundary presents any further views of the site. So it's a limited site, but it is an elevated site view of the site. So the application site for context, so these are the new units that were under construction in the previous one. This is the front end of the site in that square there, and then this element stretches down here, which is where the self-builds are supposed to go, and this bit here is the orchard. So the application is seen with residential development to the front and side, with Mendip View and some of the outbuildings visible beyond the north boundary. So the orchard is shown to the front, and whilst there's development to the east, this is not visible from this viewpoint, although is visible from the adjoining field where the application site is screened. So the development of the site would clearly be visible and would result in a change in appearance of the area, but given the surrounding development, it's considered that the proposal would round off the existing settlement, whilst the self-builds are shown to project further east. Consideration has been given to how the impact of those would be minimised. The next couple of slides are just to provide some context for the site. So this shows views courtesy of Street View, showing the built form to the west of the site with the hedge boundaries at the top left, first picture, and a view from the opposite end of the highway showing the green approach into the village, which was a particular point raised in the objection letters. In terms of the layout, the orchard is not affected by this development. So the change in street scene would not actually occur until you're parallel with the gable of the white building shown in the bottom image. So this gable here, that's where the hedge would be translocated and stepped further back. The hedge line further down here. So this element across here would all remain because it's part of the orchard. The White Gable property is actually located just beyond this tree on this side. So it's green quite both sides, and then it's at this point here you'd start losing sort of that hedgerow where it's going to be translocated. So effectively picked up, replanted, set slightly further back than where it is at the moment. And then the left image shows the White Gable property in the distance. You'll just about see it down there. And the road frontage properties along Wells Road. So from the White Gable, these ones are quite close to the road frontage, and that building is this building here. So as you come down, there's some setback for some of the units, but it's this location where the listed buildings are. And then within the site, this slide shows a view towards the existing field gate in this location here. And a view from within the site towards Mendip View. So as you can see, the land level does rise and then it falls as you head east from the entrance. So the top image shows the outbuildings associated with Mendip View. And orientating clockwise, it shows the outbuildings to the left and a view to the rear of the orchard and then to the end of the site. So looking towards the highway from within the site, the top left image, you can see the orchard and the gable of the white rendered property, which is where the main site frontage starts. Top left shows a continuation of these road frontage dwellings, and the bottom image shows the continuation of these properties, which include the listed buildings and the corner of the site relative to Coombe Batch. The earlier image from the public right of way can be seen above the roofs of these properties in the top two images. So the right of way sort of footpath runs along up here. And again, so just behind these properties along here. And then there's a hedged boundary here. And then for the next field parcel over, you haven't got a view of this site. So given the concerns that were raised, the whole development was stepped back from the frontage and reduced in scale to ensure matching ridge lines and more traditional detail relative to the properties opposite. Additional landscaping was proposed to give the impression of an orchard extending into the site and providing more robust boundaries. The garages were removed from the majority of the dwellings on the northern boundary to allow for more space in the street scene, and given concerns raised in terms of elevated viewpoints, one of the market properties and the 4 self-builds are required to have green roofs. Whilst the self-builds are in outline, a condition has been proposed to set the green roofs as a parameter of any detailed scheme. So that one is a market house property, so it's being proposed with a green roof to set sort of the tone for the development beyond that. And then these are just indicative layout, but 4 plots with green roofs. As part of the conditions, they're controlled to be 2-storey and green roof only. So they wouldn't be permitted to be any more than 2-storey, and they would have to have a green roof. And then this is the orchard planting sort of extending into the green space here. And then there's further orchard planting sort of across here and down here as well. This hedge line is retained across here and across here. And you've got pedestrian connection points onto Coombe Lane here and a pavement across the front of the site, although pavement doesn't connect beyond this site to any other pavement, so it does sort of drop off the main road. So the above slide shows the Wells Road street scene with and without vegetation, but the vegetation, when it goes in, will take a while to establish. So I think it's better to look at it without vegetation for now in terms of looking at the character. As you can see, the plots closer to the listed buildings are more traditional in design, and the proportions transition within the site and include render as you go further into the site. So these plots here are sort of located close to the listed buildings, so they've got smaller window proportions, more traditional materials, and then render starts coming in here, but ends up being part of the material palette as you go in the site. So given the concerns in terms of relationship and character to the conservation area and the setting of the listed buildings, sections have been provided to confirm the ridge height, and due to the area of public open space, the separation between these dwellings is considered to be acceptable. The setback and landscaping will also soften the view of this development in terms of the concerns that are being raised about this being a prominent entrance into the village. As you can see here, the ridge line, all the listed buildings are sort of set here, which match the plot heights of the properties to the front. The plots do get slightly taller further back within the site, but the site frontage has been downscaled. So the top elevations of the plot 2 and 3, although they'd be mirrored, and plot 1 has a large side element. So these dwellings are closest to the listed buildings in the southwest corner and present more traditionally proportioned windows. So the plots all pick up on the same palette of render, stone, brick detailing, and a mix of porches, bays, and dormer detailing on the buildings. No chimneys, unfortunately. The affordable houses are considered to blending with the surrounding development with no marked visual difference in terms of sort of showing them as a different product. In transitioning from the open market to the Southfields and to demonstrate the green roof on the open market properties, it was proposed originally to be flat roofed and maintain the material palette, but design concerns were raised with this unit. Plot 23 was subsequently amended, so now looks like the above. This does provide a better relationship to the original and reflected a more considered approach in terms of proportions. Whilst this is very definitely contemporary in terms of the wider development, it is set back behind the orchard and would not be visible in the wider locality. So officers were satisfied that this was a good transition for the Southfield developments and minimise the impact of the development from the elevated viewpoints. So this is the main internal street view of the street scene, demonstrating the more spacious street scene, because the garages were removed from these gaps to allow for a bit more spacing. And it confirms that the ridge lines of the properties would stagger down with the topography of the site. In terms of landscape impact, the application was supported with an LVIA, so landscape and visual impact appraisal, which identified the surrounding rights of way and the location of the site, and the fact that it falls within the clay moors, levels and moors landscape character area. So this just shows the location of the site in a bit more detail, with the light blue dotted line to the south being the elevated view where the sites are available from. So this sort of public right of way along here is where I took the photo from. The site is most visible from close proximity on Coombe Batch and Coombe Lane, and from the elevated ground to the south. From the lower lying ground to the north and northeast, the rise in landform and the moors to the Isle of Wedmore limits views and vegetation on field boundaries also reduces visibility. So from within the village, existing development screens the site from most locations, and from further afield, the low-lying moors and the site becomes largely screened by the trees within the landscape. Whilst there are long-distant views of the site from across the moors to the north and northeast towards Mendip, Scartman and Nylands Hill, views of these locations are so distant, the impact of the development of the site is nearly imperceptible in terms of the wider scene. So the worst viewpoint, which the one members have already seen, it's taken from the immediate right of way to the south. So in terms of on-site planting, a landscape management and master plan has been provided in support of the development, which confirms the translocation of the roadside hedge to enable visibility and additional landscape planting, including orchard trees to the frontage, to the southeast end of the site and within the gardens of some of the properties. the highway edges, plot 30, plot 1 and plot 2, and the frontages of the properties shown to benefit from landscaping. And the northeast boundary is proposed to be reinforced with native planting as well. So the landscape officer is satisfied with the proposal and has recommended conditions, which are at the back of the report. In terms of play space, there is a requirement to provide a lap given the scale of development. It was relocated from the bottom end of the site because it was right at the bottom of the wedge to a front and central location. It's now within the public open space provided to the front. There's a good degree of surveillance from the surrounding properties, and it would be secured through the section 106, including the equipment, ongoing maintenance and management, and details of the fencing and access gates would all be secured as part of the legal agreement. Impact on adjoining properties. All the development is 2-storey. The front-to-front separation distances range from 21 metres at the southeast edge, which is plot 25, to 27.5 metres to plot 1, and 23.89 metres to plot 3. So there's a good degree of separation, despite the fact that properties on the opposite side are quite close to the road frontage. Plots 3 to 6 present rear or side boundaries to Coombe Lane to the west, and the back to front distance is between 25 and 28 metres. Across the gable to plot 3 to the front elevation of the property behind is 27 metres. So plot 3 is gable end to the boundary, but there are no windows on this gable, and permitted development is also proposed to be removed, sort of basically removing by condition the ability to put any gable windows in the interest of giving rise to a perception of overlooking. Mendip View is located to the north of the site, where plots 10 to 11 locate with the rear gables facing the property. Both plots show garden areas of approximately 11 metres, resulting in a 19-metre separation to the single-storey extension and a 25-metre separation to the main house. So again, it's a good degree of spacing between the properties. So revision on the proposals have resulted in the ridge line of the properties fronting Wells Road being reduced to ensure that they match that of the adjoining listed buildings. The development as a whole has been set back from the road frontage to allow the adjacent buildings a more spacious setting and provided some additional landscaping. The impact on heritage assets is reduced through the revisions from the original scheme and now includes an undeveloped green space along the road frontage with housing setback, design changes to ensure some longer distant views towards the north are retained, and appropriate transition from more traditional to contemporary to set a marker for the Settlefield plots in terms of ensuring minimal wider impact. In terms of highways, the proposed site access plan indicates visibility displays of 2.4 by 43 metres, which are achieved and shown on this plan. As part of the development, there's also a new footway proposed along Wells Road along the site frontage. Highways considered that given the lack of pedestrian infrastructure in the vicinity of the site, the proposed footway was acceptable. This would release pedestrians in Coombe Lane. Local residents have raised concern regarding potential pedestrian and vehicular conflict, given the increased use of the pool. But Coombe Lane is a private road which also carries the public right-of-way, AX 2750. So the link was welcomed as part of the wider strategy for the access by the highway by the public rights-of-way officer. So in respect to traffic generation, the development would generate approximately 15 trips during the weekday AM and PM peak hours, which effectively is one vehicle trip for every 4 minutes during the peak hour. When considered how the traffic would be distributed, the traffic generated as a result of the development is considered unlikely to cause any severe highway safety or capacity issues. The current proposal does seek to provide a safer access and additional enhanced pedestrian infrastructure, including connections via the public right-of-way network into the village, but there is no interconnecting pavement beyond the connections that are proposed as part of this site. Travel plan statement was also confirmed to accord with the travel plan strategy, and a number of conditions have been recommended by the highway officer and are proposed at the end of the report. In terms of ecology, habitats regulations assessment has been undertaken and now concluded by members. The HRA concluded no adverse impact subject to an appropriate alternative habitat, which is being provided, a landscape ecological management plan, which is controlled by 106, and sort of an appropriate lighting design that's which is all covered by condition. In addition to the HRA, there's also a biodiversity and net gain condition that's being proposed, which includes ecological enhancements, so swift bricks, sparrow terraces, bee bricks, and hedgehog friendly fencing. In terms of surface water drainage, the application was supported with drainage maintenance schedule. The surface water drainage runoff from the site has been confirmed to be retained up to a storm event as stipulated by the Lead Local Flood Authority, which is the LLFA. So the LLFA are now satisfied with the additional information and confirm no drainage issues on the site. Highways have recommended a surface water condition because that looks at surface water on the highway infrastructure, and the Internal Drainage Board have confirmed the proposal now satisfies the flow and water quality objectives from their perspective. Permitted development rights have also been removed for driveways because they're currently shown as permeable paving, so they would be retained as permeable paving. You would not be allowed, if you lived on the site, to take your driveway up and put down concrete because it's part of the drainage strategy. A condition is also being imposed in terms of full and detailed management and maintenance plan for the surface water drainage for the site. In terms of sustainability measures, I promise we're nearly at the end of the presentation. In terms of heating and cooling, the development is proposed to use traditional masonry construction, which has a relatively high thermal mass, so compared to timber or steel construction. So construction with a high thermal mass can help to reduce overheating as it absorbs heat during the day and then slowly releases it during cooler nighttime hours, effectively smoothing out temperature fluctuations within the property. Within the development layout, orientation and massing has been considered to maximise useful passive solar gain. So glazing will be specified with a solar transmission value, so a G value, to strike a balance between useful solar gain in the winter and unwanted solar gain in the summer. All dwellings are proposed to be cross-ventilated to effectively purge warm air from the properties during periods of hot weather. Window opening areas will be considered and guided by Part O of the building regs. And water efficiency measures, including use of efficient dual flush WCs, low flow showers and taps, and appropriately sized baths will be encouraged with the aim to limit the use of water during the operation of the development. The calculation that's been put forward in the sustainability statement suggests a total water consumption of 98.6 litres per person per day, which is below the maximum of 125 litres per person per day, which is set and controlled by building regulations. In terms of amendments, just briefly, since the publication, there's been a tweaking to the wording of condition 15, just to make it more precise. So investigations were carried out, so there isn't any known potential contamination on site, but this is in the event that unexpected contamination occurs during the development. It's just a slight rewording of the condition that was already proposed. And an additional condition was proposed in terms of noise control for equipment and machinery. So in conclusion, the principle of development is considered to be acceptable relative to T2B. In terms of WED 3 for the local neighbourhood plan, the site was excluded from allocation as part of the neighbourhood plan proposal due to a number of site-specific issues that were highlighted. The developer has made roads to addressing those specific concerns. So if members are happy those concerns have been addressed, there isn't a conflict with WED 3 because it requires it to give consideration to the site selections document, which it has. The housing needs assessment has been carried out and does identify a housing need to justify the scale of the development that's been proposed. The size, scale and design of the development has been reduced in scale and character and been subject to quite intense negotiations with officers and conservation officers to ensure that there was an appropriate finish. Landscape character, additional landscaping has been input into the development as run through the slides. Play space is provided and would be covered by condition. The separation distance from adjoining properties is considered to be sufficient in terms of not giving rise to any direct amenity issue, and there is a condition to remove PD lights for a window. In respect to the heritage assets, due to the separation distance and the provision of green space to the front of the site, officers are satisfied there isn't an adverse impact on the setting of the listed buildings. Highway considerations were considered to be acceptable and conditions are recommended as part of the application. Apology, the conditions from the HRA have been pulled forward for the planning application, but there's also an additional condition in terms of biodiversity net gain that's being imposed at the end of the condition, at the end of the report. Surface water drainage again has concluded to the satisfaction of the LFA and the IDB, and the conditions are proposed in that respect. And sustainability and renewables, I think the one thing I've missed off, that there is solar panels proposed for a number of the plots, but it's being built into the infrastructure of the dwelling, and then it's buyer's choice if they wish to have them imposed. They were specifically not imposed on the road frontage properties, whilst the road frontage properties could put them on at a later date, given the sensitivities of the listed building and the conservation area. It was considered best to leave them off at this point, and then if the future occupiers want to go for solar panels, they can in the future. But in conclusion, they were the material impact of the scheme, so the application is being recommended for approval with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeze. I know Ms. Seaman would like to add something from a legal
Yes,
perspective.
thank you, Chair. In terms of the recommendation on the obligations relating to the accessible habitat enhancement area, for drafting purposes, I would suggest we add the words in perpetuity or for the lifetime of the development.
Thank you. We now come to our public question time. We have a number of speakers, so I'd like to invite Cheryl Morris to come up, please. Thank you. And when you're ready, you'll have three minutes. It'll be shown on the clock, and the buzzer will go when the 3 minutes are up. So when you're ready to start, thank you.
Bring your microphone, Sharon.
Okay, that's better. Thank you.
In recent years, Wedmore has acquired over 200 new homes, virtually double the agreed quota. What else has changed? There's been no real increase in healthcare, schools, or employment opportunities. What has increased is traffic congestion, diminution of natural habitats, and pressure on facilities. 30 new homes would significantly add to the stress and saturation this village now undergoes. If there is a need for affordable homes, how do you justify a development where 60% is more private ownership? This will add to any imbalance even more. Build costs in Wedmore are the same as elsewhere, but the market price is much higher. Therefore, this application with a 60-40 ratio in favour of private housing maximises the developer's profit with minimal, if any, benefit to the community, something Wedmore has seen before. Since this application and recent housing surveys were made, there have been several new developments in Cheddar under construction. Cheddar, also semi-rural, has 3 schools for children of any age, several sport and leisure facilities, swimming pool, 2 garages, supermarkets, garden centres, attractive reservoir which can be enjoyed by all, including less able, is on the bus route, and as a commercial and tourist hub offers employment opportunities less than 4 miles away. Importantly, housing in Cheddar is more affordable, all of which, unlike Wedmore, is within a safe walking distance of its many facilities. How can you be sure that those on your registers are not now considering Cheddar or haven't already? If this application is approved, Wedmore will have had almost 250 new homes. Coincidentally, the same number as Cheddar will, a place with roads and facilities Wedmore cannot compete with. It costs nothing to join the self-build register, but most have their own ideas of what they want, not constrained by what someone else wants them to have. And registrants' names can only be deleted if they get planning permission or apply for their names to be removed. The names of those having changed their minds or moved elsewhere omitting to do so remain. So figures on either register cannot be relied upon with certainty. One way to gain eligibility for the Affordable Homes Register is to have a family connection already living in Wedmore. If you approve more development, you will be adding to the number of people potentially eligible for the register rather than helping to diminish it, adding to the problem. Wouldn't it be more prudent to wait until all the local development has been taken up before permitting enough funds?
Thank you very much. Thank you for keeping it in time. I say we do have a number of speakers, so I see people writing furiously for points made along the way. So I think we'll address them at the end, otherwise it'll sort of break the flow. So thank you very much. Can I now invite Bob Selwood, please? Thank you. Just let us know when you're due to start and your 3 minutes will start.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Bob Selwood and as a Wedmore-based town planner, I had the privilege of leading the neighbourhood plan group, a very enthusiastic group of people, volunteers, importantly, in the 3 years it took to prepare a neighbourhood plan. At the start, 75% of people voted to prepare a neighbourhood plan. And there was a genuine belief that this was at last the opportunity for local people to influence the future of the village. And asked about the main problem in Wedmore, the answer is the lack of affordable housing for local people, demonstrating that affordable housing is both valued and wanted in the village. Wedmore is certainly not a NIMBY village. 25 sites were put forward by the public, including the application site, and the team visited and scored each for its suitability and sustainability, and I commend Dawn for her summary of the process. As others will explain, the application site was not selected as a preferred site due to a range of genuine planning objections. Preferred sites were again put to the public, and they strongly supported preferred sites and not allocating the application site. Finally, when we got to referendum, 85% However, it's important to note that the neighbourhood plan allocated more housing and suggested in the Sedgemoor local plan to cover the whole period 2032. In view of this, there was consternation in the village when the former Sedgemoor Council proceeded to permit 2 additional non-allocated sites on the basis of affordable, unmet affordable housing need. Other speakers will explain the flaws in the housing needs assessment process, which fails to distinguish, importantly, between aspirational need and actual intent. They're not going to hope. Once the neighbourhood plan was in place, local people had a genuine belief that all their work would stand for something, then non-allocated sites were determined. As the new Somerset Council, we look to you to support local democracy and planning, which is an important element in your election manifestos. If this application is permitted, country will strongly express local views, destroy the hope of local people, that your administration supports local democracy and planning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I now invite Keith Bulmer, I hope I pronounced that correctly, to come to the table, please. Thank you. Three minutes when you're ready to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm the planning secretary for the Isle of Wedmore Society, and we have a keen interest in the conservation status of Wedmore. And we assert, contrary to what's been said by the planning officer, that this application does not pass the test for T2B. The reason for that is that there is no reliable evidence for the need for any more affordable homes in Wedmore. And I'll explain how we as a society have come to that conclusion. I, on behalf of the society, have written to council officers and to each of the housing associations who currently manage affordable homes in Wedmore. And I've asked them one question. How many of those residents currently in affordable homes in Wedmore had previously expressed a need in a housing needs assessment? Neither the council officers that I've written to, nor any of the housing associations could answer that question. They each told me that they do not hold that information. We assert, therefore, that the 14 people who expressed a so-called need in this developer's own survey are the same people, the very same people, who expressed a need in the previous survey and in the one before that. They are expressing an aspiration without any intention. And the fact is that neither this council nor the associations can disprove that position. They do not have between them the reliable evidence that is necessary. So our society challenges this relatively new council to prove without doubt that there is a need and to refuse this application until that need is proven transparently and without doubt. Our society doesn't doubt that the recent survey undertaken by the developers revealed the data that it claims, but we're confident that any other survey would result in the very same people expressing the so-called need. It's not the developer's survey that is flawed in this particular case. It is the entire housing needs assessment process that is so flawed that neither the council nor the housing associations, by their own admission, can join up the information they each have to prove the case. We therefore, as a society, urge you as a council to reject this application until the process is clear and transparent.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping to time. We'll now invite Trevor Prideaux to the table, please. Three minutes when you're ready to start.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. I would like to talk you through some facts. Fact: the land is greenfield site and outside the development boundary. Fact: the land does not fall within Wedmore Neighbourhood Plan for development. Fact: this proposal is contrary to Wedmore Neighbourhood Plan Policy WED 3. Fact: this proposal does not satisfy the local plan T2B policy. Fact: there are several listed buildings within conservation area 20 metres south of the proposed development. Fact: this is an important gateway to historic Wedmore from the east. Fact: as per the local plan, the number of dwellings that need to be built between 2011 and 2032 is 132. Actual numbers of proposed dwelling applications, approved dwelling applications from 2011 is 227, plus 17 additional ones with outline planning permissions, bringing the total to 244, which is 112 more than the local plan states, with 9 years still to run on the plan. Fact: the developer claims that 14 people need a home in Wedmore. 13 of those people are not registered on Home Finders Somerset, so they won't get a home in Wedmore. Fact: on the planning portal, there is one comment in support of this application. There are 230 objections. 230. Fact: this application is in one form and another has sat on the planning portal undetermined for over 1,000 days. The The Wedmore Neighbourhood Plan will run until 2032, and part of the reason a village like Wedmore to have a neighbourhood plan is to stop speculative developers attempting to build on greenfield sites outside of the development boundary. Fact, 85.5% of Wedmore residents voted in favour of the neighbourhood plan. That's 881 Wedmore residents who are your electorate that approved the neighbourhood plan development sites, and this is not one of them. Are we really going to dig up 3 acres of greenfield site every time a speculative developer conducts its own housing needs assessment? I was born one of 9 children in a 3-bedroom council house in Linton, North Devon. I've chaired a town council, so I know a thing or two about housing needs. And I also know what's right and what's wrong, and this is wrong. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Prideaux. Next invite Mrs. Farley on behalf of Wedmore Parish Council, please. 3 minutes from when you're ready to start.
5 recent developments in Wedmore have put strain on the limited infrastructure, services and employment opportunities, creating concerns for the parish council as follows. The doctor's surgery is staffed by nurses only. All GP appointments are in Axbridge, over 6 miles away, a route not served by public transport. No NHS service is provided at the dentist. Employment opportunities are limited, the majority of workers travelling out of the village. The Heritage report stated that the site will be hugely impactful on an already fraught and wretched situation in the heart of the village. Damage is regularly caused from walls, roofs, gateposts and railings. Access to the site. The site entrance within metres of the brow of the hill, limiting visibility for cars exiting. The council closely cited SID showed 55% of vehicles exceeding the speed limit of 30. The road is narrowed at the entrance, creating a pinch point exacerbated by residents parking. Ecology. Somerset Council are signatories to Somerset Climate Emergency. The #1 key focus being to protect what we already have. The planning at nearby Crossbar include a condition of no artificial lighting along the eastern and southern boundaries. The original hedges be retained and protected under Habitat Regulations 2010. Allowing this development makes a mockery of such restrictions when the site is within metres. Nearly 13,000 bat passes were recorded on the site, a minimum of 11 species, including lighter birds, greater and lesser horseshoe bats, which will be disturbed. The hedge along the southern boundary is an ancient hedge, offering high ecological value and historic features, supporting a range of wildlife. It is classified as a UK BAP priority habitat. The proposal is to translocate this hedge. The recently translocated hedge on the site of Cheddar fared very badly. Huge lengths dying, defeating the object of the exercise and making a mockery of the process. Affordable housing. 44 people in need of affordable housing were identified by the HNA, prepared by Duncan Harvey. Subsequent developments in Wedmore have produced a total of 53 affordable houses. The HNA produced on behalf of the developer in December 22 found 14 more people in need, 13 of whom are not registered on Homes in Somerset. Thus, they will never be allocated any of the affordable houses proposed. The parish council believes by creating a neighbourhood plan, the community had the opportunity to guide development within our neighbourhood. Given that this application contravenes the neighbourhood plan, it makes a mockery of a supposedly democratic process. Wedmore is a village, not a town. It does not have the infrastructure to accommodate more development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Will Human, former district councillor, to come to the table, please. 3 minutes from when you're ready to start. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. Well, I don't think I could sum up any better than the previous speakers. I didn't know what they were going to say, but they put down every point that I think is of most importance. This is not an exercise in providing affordable housing. It's not an exercise in trying to solve climate change either. It's about piggybacking on the back of a flawed housing need assessment provided to you by the developer to build on another greenfield site, ancient pasture, ancient hedgerows. And as for the four bats, well, if you know your geography around there, you know the Cock Lake is about 2 miles away as the bat flies. So they'll have to find their new hunting ground out there, apparently. The developers clearly haven't met policy T2B. They have tried to persuade us that there is some form of housing need still after, and these are the recent builds in Wedmore, and you're quite welcome to have a copy of this. The Strongbox phase 1 and 2, 51 new units with 14 affordable homes, including 8 affordable rents, 6 plus 6 shared ownership. And that's important because the developers say that the affordable numbers contained in this include shared homes. They don't, they're in addition. Cross Farm, 55 built, 24 affordable, 24 affordable rent, 4 intermediate affordables. Holden Gardens, there's 11 new houses there, none are affordable. We have Cross Farm phase 2. The application has 9 dwellings, and we are going to have a number of affordable units in that, including chalet style bungalow. There's further development of Paradise Barton, 9 units, 3 more affordable homes. There is not a paucity of affordable homes when you think that an affordable home in Wedmore is still probably not quite as affordable as you'd like it to be. And when you send out a questionnaire saying, would you like somewhere cheaper to rent within the next 5 years? You're bound to get some people that say yes, but this affordability is relative. And if you allow this, you'll be running a wrecking ball through the local neighbourhood plan. And I can't stress enough that we sat in this room and we all accepted that neighbourhood plan as Sedgemoor District Council unanimously. It did not include this site, which was rejected by the hard-working neighbourhood plan team, which was then voted on in favour by 85% of Wedmore. Please, planners, take what you're given when it comes to the fields and not try and grab more. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the final speaker, Tony Hammock, agent for the. Thank you. 3 minutes from when you're ready to start.
Don't need to do anything. Say some.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Hammock. I'm the planning consultant and a local resident. Whilst local objections are understandable and more development is not welcome, in fact, the objectors' interests represent a small percentage of residents, suggesting that either most people don't object or have no reason to object. Reporters on Wedmore Matters say that there is a need for affordable homes, stating that decisions should not be controlled by a vocal minority. Wedmore Green commented positively, commending the proposed sustainable construction. The applicant has worked with the planning authority and consultees over a period of time, and the application for you reflects this collaboration. There is a comprehensive committee report detailing the planning history, the objections, how these objections have been addressed, compliance with policy, and confirmation of officers and consultee support. I'm not going to attempt to summarise in 3 minutes what has taken the case officer 56 pages to report. I'm simply going to tell you why this application delivers betterment to Wedmore and its residents now and in the future. 30 energy efficient, bespoke new homes on a sensitively landscaped and ecology-led site, delivering 12, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom affordable homes for rent, with 44 households registered with the council, delivering the unmet needs for first-time buyers and renters and for all needing a home in Wedmore. 14 open market homes and 4 self-built green roofs. Natural materials and bespoke design reflect the local character of the village. Fabric-first construction, non-fossil fuel hot water and heating, high levels of thermal insulation, reducing running costs and carbon footprint. Electric vehicle charging points and air source heat pumps to all homes and solar PV panels where allowable. Extension of neighbouring orchard and extended hedgerows along the Wells Road delivers an attractive visual gateway to the village. New pedestrian and cycle access to Coombe Lane along Coombe Lane and Wells Road connects the existing rights of way into the village centre. A new pavement along the front of the site, delivering connectivity for existing and new residents, improving safety and less use of cars. A biodiversity-led application incorporating blue and green infrastructure, species-rich grassland, orchard tree planting, retained and enhanced hedgerows, bee and insect-friendly planting, bat boxes, bird boxes, and hedgehog highways. Generous public open space with natural timber children's play space. Safe access and parking spaces and for existing residents approved by Somerset Highways.
Your 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
I commend this application.
Thank you. There are obviously a number of issues there raised. I've written down about pressure on facilities, affordable homes and the housing need assessment process, family connections, concerns about diverting from the neighbourhood plan, access, ecology, affordability. If you would like officers between you to pick up on the points that you've noted as well, that would be great, please.
Yeah, I think for members, in terms of point of clarity, I'll go into a little bit more detail about housing needs assessment, and then I'll pass to Nick in terms of the overall scale of growth that Wedmore is seeing. So in terms of the housing needs assessment, obviously the original one was run by the council. We didn't run this one. That's because generally we sort of say it's a document that highlights a level of needs that's appropriate as a snapshot in time. We don't rerun it within sort of 12 months or 2 years of one that's just been done. Of the one that was done, that need got accommodated in other developments that were discussed by one of the speakers, so that need has been used up. So a revised housing needs assessment was done by the developer. In terms of how they did that and the methodology for that, it is different to how we do ours, because we go out through Homes Finder Somerset. We couldn't share those details with the developer. That details on the people that we've already got that for us have expressed an interest. So you'll have to do it manually. In the housing needs assessment, they confirmed, they emailed out 1,576 questionnaires, all to local residents. So all of them had a local connection living locally. Of those, 96 came back suggesting they might be in housing need. But from the answers, the questions that they raised, from the 96, that was whittled down to 14. So the others either didn't answer in enough detail or were considered to have enough financial background that they could sort out their own housing needs assessment or housing need issue without necessarily having to rely on the release of an exceptional site to meet it. So it was whittled down from 96 to 14. Of those 14, the tenure that was identified as needed is social or affordable rented. So that's basically a rent at 80% of market value or 50% of market value. So the Affordable Housing Officer has recommended support for the proposal subject to them all being social rents at 50% rent. So of the development that's being proposed, they are being proposed at 50% rent price, which isn't something that's being offered on any of the other sites. So it is an affordable product and it is to meet the identified needs as part of HNA. The background questionnaire, how they were going to do what they did, and the methodology in terms of how they did it was all agreed in discussion with the housing manager, the affordable housing manager, before they did it. And then when they had the results, there was a further meeting to discuss the conclusion of those results, and then ultimately the publication of the HNA. Nick, I don't know if you want to come on to the scale of development and the other surrounding sites.
Yes, just for information, my name's Nick Tate. I'm the service manager for planning policy, so was actually responsible for the adopted local plan, and obviously a lot of the discussion has been around policy T2B in the local plan. The 2 refers to the tier. We categorise all main towns, market town. There's reference to Cheddar. Cheddar is a tier 1 settlement along with North Heatherton, reflecting its much larger status. Although I've had many discussions with Cheddar Parish Council, who actually expressed concern about the level of facilities at Cheddar itself. In terms of Wetmore, it is one of 6 tier 2 settlements, so it is expected to take strategic levels of housing growth. And there was reference to the housing set out in terms of the target. Important to mention, all of our housing targets are expressed as minimums. That wasn't a maximum amount of development, it was a minimum, and it would have been a minimum based on desk level assessment of constraints. We went through a very similar exercise to the neighbourhood plan in terms of sites which were put forward. We would have done similar assessments, and it would be fair to say that a site like this, we would have probably at the stage would have rejected on the basis of the desk level assessment. The difference is obviously for a planning application process, all of those detailed considerations can be subject to much greater scrutiny and evidence provided. In terms of the, I do accept frustration the way the policies are set out, because we have an indicative level of growth for the settlement, and then we have this additional policy which says if there is demonstrable evidence of continued local housing need, then exceptionally sites can come forward. That was a policy put in explicitly through our examination, so subject to a different form of democratic process, but that was through a public examination, and the inspector was keen to point out that there isn't a green belt, there isn't a restriction on development outside of our settlement boundaries. Our policies should not therefore restrict development where there is an identified need. And just picking up on the neighbourhood planning point, someone mentioned about it controlling or resisting development. Explicitly, actually, neighbourhood plans, their function isn't to stop development. It is about having those policies to control where appropriate, and also to be in broad compliance with the local plan. We've just heard about the affordable housing needs survey, and that's really the key trigger. If there's an identified additional housing need which hasn't been met, then policy T2B comes into play. That's really the first hurdle to come across. And in terms of the advice we've had from our affordable housing manager, in terms of our own analysis of it, the conclusions of that survey have been accepted. And I think I'd venture that it would be surprising to think that there wasn't an ongoing affordable housing need, because even since that survey was undertaken, we've only seen the difficulty of access to mortgages, prices, the ability to actually get onto home ownership, become more extreme, and we're finding this across all of our across our area. But we take it on face value. It's concluded an affordable housing need. I did quite a detailed assessment, therefore policy T2B. Reference again was made to facilities and the pressure of those in the village. Wetmore does have a significant level of facilities. That's why it is categorised as a tier 2 settlement. Also, through the collection of community infrastructure levy, that provides funding to invest in local services where a requirement or a need has been expressed. Reference is made to healthcare facilities. We do actually have a policy which would enable us to secure contributions if it was identified by the NHS as requiring that. I don't believe they actually made that request. We are guided by by their own response to our consultations. But certainly community infrastructure levy does give an opportunity to invest in other local facilities, should those be under stress in terms of this application itself. We've heard a lot about the details, and I'm not going to touch on those themselves, but again, in terms of our assessment, in terms of it meeting the other criteria of T2B, we consider that if that is the case. The conflict or apparent conflict with the neighbourhood plan, an important consideration, and it is around WED3. And I suppose fundamentally, this is going to
hinge on the acceptance of the housing needs survey, which has identified additional need, because certainly WED3 does therefore refer back to the local plan policy and say, therefore, policies can be assessed against that. And in terms of the fact that it wasn't one of the preferred sites through that assessment, I think that half back to what I just said previously, but the key issues for it not being identified have, we believe, been thoroughly examined and addressed through the detailed work of this application. So matters around highway access, highway safety have been addressed with satisfaction of officers. We across the district will have granted permission on a number of sites which were excluded from our own sites as strategic housing land availability assessment across many of our villages under this policy T2B and other policies, because when an application has come in, they have looked at those detailed considerations and they have adequately addressed those. So it's not an unusual situation that at our very high level desk-based survey, we may have rejected sites, but subsequently they've come through and been approved by this or previous planning committees. So I think hopefully that's given an overview of the policy position. But obviously, if there's more detailed questions, I'm happy to come back to those.
Thank you. Can I just ask Mr. Brinkman, so there were some highways issues that were raised? Thank you.
Yes, if it helps. Yeah, as far as the visibility space is concerned, they are based on the posted speed limit, which is 30 miles an hour, and the displays shown on the IDOC drawing up there indicates display to the right of 56.83 metres and to the left towards Wells 63 metres, which take into account the vertical deflection in the roads as the road drops away on either side. So you've got a basis of the 43 metres, which is the minimum, and it extends out further than that. So the visibility displays are considered to be appropriate. Just one small point, there are telegraph poles that will be upgraded as part of any Section 278 works, so there will be an increased safety element from the betterment in terms of that highway lighting. I think that was the only point. Accident history doesn't indicate any issues on the site frontage either, so no issues from the highway authority.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, just one final point in terms of the affordable housing specifically, because there was mention about whether local residents would actually be able to access it. The release of this site, if agreed, is based on the housing needs assessment for the local residents with the local connection. Given it's outside of the settlement boundary, there would be a requirement in the section 106 for there to be a local lettings requirement. So it gets offered to Wedmore first, and they are the ones that have access to the affordable rent, social rent through the 106. So just to give some reassurance, it is this one because it's not inside the settlement boundary. It's not to meet wider strategic growth. It's to meet Wedmore need. So it's limited for Wedmore residents. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now open it up for committee members to ask questions or raise issues. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't expect to be speaking first, to be honest, but there we go. Just to make my position clear, my name's Councillor Matt Martin, and I am, along with Councillor Harry Munt, one of the two county unitary councillors that serve Wedmore and the surrounding villages. And I would just like to make my position quite clear. I don't live in Wedmore. I live over the other side of the hill, but I do go through it very frequently, and I've spent quite a bit of time over the last few weeks hanging around. I've been making a nuisance of myself in the pubs. I've been talking to people on the street. I've been asking questions, and I don't want to openly disagree with the young lady that spoke to us earlier, but I have found not one person that is in favour of this application. And I will go out on a limb, and I know full well that what I am about to say is emotive and doesn't comply with the need for our arguments to go down the route of material considerations. But I feel so strongly about this. I've got this in a number of my villages. We've got the same down in Middlezoy. We've got the same down towards Othery. And there has to be a time when we look at the areas around our villages and say, it's enough now. We've had the developments around Wedmore, 3 majors. We've got the figures in the Wedmore local plan. We've got the figures in the Sedgemoor local plan. And it does beg the question that if these figures can be manipulated and moved sideways, why should we have them? Now, once again, I'm very aware that I'm sitting to the right of the chair as the vice chair of this board, but I feel very strongly about this. And it doesn't matter that it's in my patch. There has to come a time when we look at the areas around us in the countryside and say, this is just not the right place for this. This is not a NIMBY argument. This is an argument about maintaining the structure and way of life of our villages. I must be careful not to say the wrong thing, but I will be voting against this. And in fact, Madam Chairman, I would like to propose that we vote against this proposal. I'd like to put that forward as a proposal. Thank you.
Can I ask Councillor Martin whether he continues to keep an open mind in this application, because we have not had the debate yet, and I'm making sure that you are not predetermined or biased in any way. So please, can you confirm?
I can confirm that I'm not biased in it. I'm happy to be convinced that this is a useful way forward. But yeah, you're quite right. I'm not predetermined, and I'm not against development. I am against wrong development. But yes, thank you for the clarification. I can confirm I'm not predetermined on this application. Thank you.
And you are prepared to listen to all the merits of the argument before casting your vote?
Absolutely, yes.
Can I just clarify, are you at this stage proposing making a recommendation or are you listening to the rest of the debate?
No, thank you, Chair. I'll withdraw that and I'll listen to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just remind anybody who's minded to be opposing, it does need to be on planning grounds. So just to be mindful of that as the debate goes on. Okay, Councillor Hendry, you were next to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points actually about the highways without getting into the houses. And for just a minute. The highways are actually on board regarding display the entry and exit. A couple of points here that seems to have been mentioned, and I'd just like to put forward. Page 55, paragraph 3. Somebody's mentioned about the 35.9 miles per hour, something else like that. It's been over 30 miles an hour. That's not a planning issue. Somebody's got a problem with actually speeding cars. They should contact Wales Police or whatever it is with the police. But it's not a planning issue. It doesn't come into this whatsoever. Somebody else mentioned, and I can't find where it was in the paperwork, but it was there, that there's a possibility of traffic travelling to and from the M5 motorway from this, they're running through the village. Well, unless somebody's got evidence to actually support that, they can't actually say that because nobody actually knows that anyone's going to be working somewhere that involves the M5 motorway. So they were suggesting, I suppose, in the mornings they're going through the village to get to the M5 back again, but there's no evidence to actually support that, and not everybody always works anyway. So that's before we go into the houses. I just want to clarify about the highways, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are you looking for a response from the highways officer for that? Is there any response you'd like to give?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as part of assessing the planning application, the one thing they look at is what development is proposed, how many bedrooms they are, and then if you put an average family in that house, you know, what's the likely traffic generation. So we have that covered as part of the presentation. I mean, that would assume if you were going to the M5, you would have to go through the village. But in terms of the scale of traffic and the frequency of traffic, there wasn't an issue in terms of highway safety concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Slocum. Sorry, Councillor Slocum, before you start, I've been, sorry to interrupt. No, I've been told there is a problem with bees in this room. Leda, would you like to?
It's just really a bit of a health and safety notice, really. If anybody is allergic to these, we do have some bees. You'll see them buzzing around a little bit. One of our planning officers reckons it's, you know, have perfume, but I think actually it's just that they've woken up. We have had a bee man come and take it. We've had them there for several months. They don't do anything, they just buzz around. But it's really if anybody is allergic, and that's all I'm really concerned. So yeah, they won't hurt. Yeah, they won't come towards you. Hopefully, we've never had a problem with them. We just can't get rid of them, unfortunately. We have tried several times, but they just love the Sedgemoor room.
Okay, thank you. This is the third planning meeting in this room. We haven't had an issue, but of course, if you have an allergy, it's very serious. So thank you for that. Councillor Slocum, sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have an allergy, but I do carry an EpiPen, so we'll never know. I just think today, I think all the speakers came today, and I think they all spoke very, very well. And I know exactly how you feel about these areas. But moving on, I would like to ask Councillor Martin if he would withdraw what he said about manipulating the figures. I think that's very unjust and very wrong when we're starting a debate, and it's not the sort of thing that I think we should come in here predetermined and actually saying that the council have manipulated the figures. So I would ask you first, I wrote it down as you said it, so please trust me. I do have some other questions, Madam Chairman, but I'd like to ask that question first, please.
Possibly manipulation is the wrong word. I was referring to the fact that we have in the Sedgemoor plan a housing need of 50/116 properties. Have I disappeared? No. And in the Wedmore plan, 127 properties running between 2011 and 2032. And I know those are minimum figures, but we have already exceeded that by a great deal. And I guess manipulation was the wrong word. I don't know what the right word would be, but my statement was around the fact that if the figures are down here, documented in both the Sedgemoor and the Wedmore local plans, is there any real point having them there if we can ignore them? So I apologise. The manipulation was the wrong term of phrase.
It was manipulating.
Manipulating. Okay, my diction isn't as great as it could be, but that wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making is we have figures down here, and we have a lot of officers working on the figures. My question is, if we have the figures, why don't we abide by them, or at least try and abide by them, not ignore them when it becomes tricky? And you're quite right. Again, I will state the fact that I have coming in not predetermined. I'm willing to listen to the argument, but I've listened to all the people speaking today. I've spoken to lots of people. So I will make my own judgment, but thank you, Councillor Slocum.
May I ask, Madam Chairman, if we can...
You got that one behind.
Just use it for a second.
I thought the bees had got me there. Would I be able to ask, following that question, whether an officer can just clarify that point again? Because that was said, and I think we just, before we carry on to ask other further questions, it would be really good if we could have some further clarification, please. Thank you.
I'll set out the plain English version, and then I'll pass over to Nick to do the technical stuff that I missed. So in terms of the housing figures, by the scale of the development, and demonstrate to government we are allocating the right amount of sites and looking at the right amount of growth for the whole local plan period, we have to set a minimum. So we look at the sustainability of all the different areas. They get graded. This is a tier 2 area, so not as sustainable as sort of Cheddar, but more sustainable than the tier 3, tier 4s, etc. They got given an indicative level of growth. So that was, if we're meeting our housing target and we're spreading it out over all these places, a minimum level of growth for each of these areas is this. In addition to that number, and this is the bit where I think members need to be careful, in addition to that number, we've also got policy T2B that says in tier 2 areas, if there is still, notwithstanding the fact you might have met those numbers, a degree of outstanding housing need, which is the affordable housing needs assessment that's been done if there's a demonstrated affordable housing need for the area, which has been shown for this one for 14, you can release a site on the edge of the settlement, which has a 60-40% balance of affordable housing and 60% market. They do that so that you can build the site because you need the money from the market housing to deliver the affordable housing, and that's still permissible. It goes above and beyond the numbers in the local plan. It goes above the numbers that were allocated as part of the Wedmore local plan, but it's not against the local plan. There's a policy in the local plan that allows for it, provided we're happy it's been demonstrated there's still a need. So within Wedmore, there is unfortunately still a need for a lot of people to access affordable housing. The housing needs assessment was done, identified 14 of those, a number of those being proposed as part of this development and would be 50% rent as an affordable housing product for locals secured through the 106. So for us as officers, we're happy that it's compliant with those policies. Nick, do you know if there's anything?
No, I mean, that's covered it, but I do understand partly the way that the local plan is written, that you see targets for the tier 2 settlements, and you would look about it and say, actually, in terms of the strategic growth, because that's it's not Wedmore specific, you know, you fulfill that and then some. Looking at that table, shall I say, it's the intricacies of a planning policy T2B, which basically says as long as there's still local affordable housing need, sites can come forward, and that process, to be honest, will and can continue certainly until the local plan is reviewed. And I know there was mention about saying, well, maybe it's time to stop. I mean, the harsh reality is, when's the right time to stop providing affordable housing for local people? The only time that's the case is when, you know, we've managed to move all those people into a position where they can gain access to the housing market. No one's saying that the process isn't flawless, but that is the planning policy basis which went through its independent examination. So it does allow these sites to come forward where you can evidence that need.
Thank you. Councillor Munt.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I am also a local member representing Wedmore, but I'm in, not predetermined. I do have a lot of concerns with this one, though. I've not heard. Okay, so I'll start with one of the smaller ones, I think. Highways. I'm really surprised to see that there's a pavement going away from the village that doesn't seem to go anywhere, but the one going towards the village doesn't connect up with anything that's usable. So there's no actual footway into the village. There's no actual, you know, we've just passed a climate change emergency and we're encouraging active travel, but there's no actual way into the village that doesn't go past a really dangerous point just beyond where you can see on that screen. So firstly, I'm surprised that Highways didn't just say absolutely no to this. So there's that, and I'm quite new to this planning thing, but I remember when you were telling us to judge these applications, it was, you know, you weigh up what these are, and there was environmental concern from what's been said today, and that in my view there is highway concern and safety. There's an awful lot of affordable housing concern that's been said a lot better than I can. And on the other side, I think the only thing that actually, this is outside the development boundary for Wedmore. It goes against the neighbourhood plan. So the only thing that actually is in favour of this application, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a local affordable housing need. And from what I've heard, I appreciate where the officers are coming from, but I think it's questionable at best that our own officers have found there wasn't a need after the previous developments, and now the developer is finding that there is a need. If we take that as gospel, and that's fine, I don't think I do, but if we do, then I'm also a little bit concerned about the fact that those, I don't know if what's been said is true, that the people who get offered that housing first is on Somerset Home Finder system. Even if that's true or not, all of those 14 people in Wedmore would have to fill those houses, because otherwise, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but otherwise another developer could come in, take a piece of land which is outside the development boundary and say there's still a housing need. And they could do that every year, year on year on year. I think that's correct, logically. So that is a seriously flawed system, which I can see why a lot of the things that have been put forward today, I don't want to use this phrase, but sort of tick boxes in terms of kind of, you know, here's a problem, well, we've kind of solved it, here's a problem, well, we've solved it. But the one thing that actually, in my view, is in favour of this application, I don't think I can fully support. If you can address any of those concerns, I'd be happy to listen, but as it stands, I think I'm probably going to have to, I definitely can't support this as it stands.
Thank you. I'll cover off some of the affordable housing and environmental issues, and then I'll pass on to Carl for some of the highway comments, if that's acceptable. So in terms of the affordable housing, the original housing needs assessment we carried out was 2018, I think. And so there were other developments that a number of the speakers have listed that came in, got consented, taken up that number. We didn't rerun it at that point because we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the time. Normally we say housing needs assessment is valid for about 3 years. We don't tend to put resource and energy into generating another one. Had we have generated another one, I would suspect it would be likely to identify housing need, probably greater than the one that we had identified because they don't have access to our resources. Notwithstanding that, they commissioned it.
Just to clarify, so the data that the developer or the third company that's on behalf of the developer is using isn't as detailed or up to date as ours.
So it wouldn't give them contact details of anyone who's got a local connection to Wedmore that isn't currently in Wedmore. So when they did theirs, they had to post out to residents of Wedmore only because they wouldn't have the contact details of anyone who's got a local connection, but not necessarily locally based. And we couldn't give them that information for GDPR. So they've got less people to go out to start off with as a start. Then of the need that came back, there was quite a high level that considered themselves to be in housing need. There was about 96. From that, they whittled down actually, you know, if they've got sufficient income, if they're sort of overestimating what they think their need is, because want versus need is two different things. But they went through the whittling down process from 96 to 14. Of that, a number of them weren't on the Homes Finder register. So we've got a number of people on the Homes Finder register that we acknowledge are in housing need because they're on the Homes Finder register. We've gone through an audit with them. So we've already got a lot of people in housing need. But the additional, as part of the housing needs assessment, weren't originally on Homes Finder. Whether they should be on Homes Finder now, but whether they subscribe or not is up to them. But it's through Homes Finder that they get access to the affordable housing.
So just to clarify, my point still stands that if these 14 houses aren't taken up by people who are in housing need, there is absolutely nothing stopping another developer taking another piece of land outside the development boundary and using exactly the same argument that we've heard today to just continually develop.
If there is still a need, there is still the ability to consent sites outside of the settlement boundary through policy T2B. What there will be is a local lettings link. So there is a requirement for these units to go to those with a local connection. So that's secured through the 106.
Sorry, is that a requirement or is that dependent on the people who actually want to move in? If they don't want to move in, or if they can't afford to because mortgage prices went up again this morning, there's no actual requirement for those people to move in.
There's a requirement for it to be offered to local people first, and they're not mortgaged, they're social rent, so it's 50% whatever you'd pay for rent for the same thing on the open market. So it's the most affordable product you could get on this particular site, going to local residents first. Then in terms of environmental concerns, obviously the HRA has dealt with the specific impact on the designated habitats and the protected species, in this case bats, two types of bats in the foraging area. So that's all tied up with the off-site mitigation of the 2.5 hectares near Rugs Hill. and the on-site mitigation in terms of the additional landscaping that's gone in. And there's also biodiversity requirements as one of the conditions at the back of the report. So with all of those, the ecologist is now happy that it meets the environmental requirements. I don't know if you want to the highways.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just to relate to the concern about pedestrian access, it is fair to say the MPPF prioritises pedestrians and cyclists. But I think the developer in this case has provided infrastructure on the site frontage. There's also network of public footpaths to the west of the site leading into the village. So there are choices available to pedestrians. People living on the site will have a choice which way they go. So I don't think, well, certainly we don't think there is any kind of severe impact from a pedestrian access safety viewpoint.
Sorry, just to come back, I think I would disagree, just because if you look down Coombe Lane, I think it's basically a dirt track, which is, if you've got disabled access needs, then that's going to be no good at all. And if you come down the main Wells Road into the village, then you're stepping out into what has already been described as very fast. And I would say, I know that you were saying that speed doesn't come into it, but that means that it's dangerous. There's no accident history there, but that's because there's no junction there yet. I know from experience and from the SID data that we get from the parish council that is a very fast bit of road. So I don't know whether it would be an S106 or if it's an S278, I think, but like as part of making that part of the development to actually, I still don't think I support the actual development, but if it is going to go through, I'd like to see more safety going through that part, because as we've heard earlier, we're going to have loads of people coming from this development coming into the village to go to the shops, to go to the pubs, to go to the school. You're going to have kids walking down this bit as well. I think it's completely inappropriate just to put a massive development there with no consideration as to how, okay, they can get out of the road, but then I appreciate what the decision you come to, but I disagree.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, again, I refer back to the fact that there is the posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. If there is an issue with speeding, it's a police matter, basically, to be enforced in the village. And hopefully that will happen. The accident data doesn't, again, support any kind of issues, again, relating to pedestrians, because the accidents are reported to the police are injury-only accidents. So if pedestrians were at risk, that would have appeared by now as an issue one would have thought. So,
sorry, but logically, no pedestrians use that bit of road because it's too dangerous to walk down. So why would there be any data? To me, that just doesn't make sense.
I won't spend too much time on this because obviously it's for members to debate. What the development is providing, a pavement across the site frontage on Wells Road. So current people that do find themselves walking up and down that road do have a safe refuge for the extent of the site frontage. There is also a pedestrian link through to Coombe Lane, which I appreciate there has been some concern raised by residents in terms of traffic generation and pedestrian conflicts down that lane. That lane is a public right of way, so it is currently and would still be actively encouraged for pedestrian traffic. And if you live locally, you should be aware of that in terms of looking after residents. There isn't, Councillor right, there isn't a connecting pavement from the front of this site until you get slightly further in. You can use the public right of way from Coombe Lane and then cross through to a pavement in fairly short order. I think if this were something that members were particularly concerned about, I would probably recommend a site visit to have a look at it. There isn't pavements in this particular area. The listed buildings don't have pavements to the front of them, but this was considered to be appropriate middle ground in terms of providing safe refuge given the scale of the site, but given the proximity to the other pedestrian connection points and the fact that it is sort of shared access and pedestrian routes existing, the level of intensification wasn't that was considered to raise an objection.
Councillor Bruce and then Councillor Ham.
Can you clarify for me, those people that have been identified as the 14 that have the housing need? Obviously, if the council do a housing need assessment, you have access to home finder details and you contact those directly. Those 14 people, they've been whittled down. Are those 14 people actually eligible to register on home finder? Has that been confirmed?
Yes, as part of the results after they'd done the survey, they'd whittled it down, they came in and discussed the findings with the affordable housing manager. So they're all eligible. Interestingly, the question was specifically asked of them whether they're on HomeSfinder or not. We don't usually ask because we approach them through HomeSfinder. So this is a pocket of unmet needs that we were previously unaware of.
Okay, and also on page 70, it refers to these people as identified, previously unidentified local affordable housing need. So how did you work out that it was previously unidentified? Because one of the speakers previously said that it wasn't possible to prove that these were not the same people that had also expressed a housing need previously, but hadn't actually moved forward or registered or done anything about it. So how is it unidentified?
On HomeSfinder, we have their details. We haven't shared those details because we can't for GDPR purposes. As part of testing the robustness of the housing needs assessment, that detail was shared with the affordable housing manager. So those details have been shared, checked and reviewed as part of the process, but it's not something that's publicly in the document for GDPR purposes.
So they are effectively new.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ham.
Just is the side button on? Other side. Doing that one.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a potentially quite simplistic point that seems to have escaped from the beginning when the residents were talking. That's a site that wasn't identified in the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan is a legal document that was drawn up by the residents who will have put a lot of time and effort into it and done many discussions. And I think we need, and it is a document that we have to take note of. And I think it's important to remember that.
Thank you. I think that point was picked up under tier 2B, but Mr. Tate, if you wanted to.
Yes, and absolutely right. The neighbourhood plan is part of the development plan along with the council's own local plan, which is in force, which is why we did, and there has been discussion about relationship between the two. And fundamentally, the issue hinges on if there's unmet need, the neighbourhood plan refers directly to policy G2B in the local plan. So if it's accepted that there is evidence of unmet housing need, then broadly the proposal in terms of that point would be consistent with neighbourhood and local plan. But reiterate again, the neighbourhood plan isn't a document, and government guidance makes this very clear. It's not a document for stopping development. It's a document, and inevitably T2B sites will all be outside of the settlement hierarchy, settlement boundary. That's why they come forward as exceptions. That's how we're able to secure the affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Fillmore.
Thank you. I must admit, having heard the debate and read the report as well, the officers, I think, in the report say this is a balanced decision, and I think it very much is. There are pros and cons to this site. It's obvious the applicant and the officers have done an awful lot to improve the original application. So what we're seeing in front of us now is an awful lot better. I'm not convinced yet that it goes as far as it needs to in terms of being acceptable to myself as things stand. I'm not so worried about housing needs assessment debate we've had. It is a process that people go through. It's always been explained to us in the past that housing needs assessment is a snapshot of what the current position is. So those 14 people will not necessarily be the same 14 people who end up in the houses, because even if we were to grant this, it's going to take time for this to be built out. We don't know what will have happened to those 14 people, but it gives you an idea of the scale of the issue. So it's more indicative than it is to say that it's up to them. We've certainly, in my own patch, we had to make it very clear to people who filled in that form that they weren't guaranteed that they were going to get one of the properties, because people would have to go through the Home Finder Somerset once those properties become available. So that, to me, I think it shows there is still a need. but it's not precise. The things that I must admit concern me as things stand at the moment is the site itself, its location, it's on the edge of the community. As you leave Wedmore at the moment, it is part of what breaks the feeling of the urbanness of the more village area to as you're heading out to the countryside. And it's very much an open aspect at the moment. The developers have tried to address that with the green spacing at the front. I don't think it will achieve what they're trying to do. So from my own point of view, as things stand at the moment, it would be changing the character of that area of the village by changing that. In terms of the hedge, trying to maintain it by translocation for the access, I tend to agree with one of the speakers who translocation is a great word. On a number of sites I've been aware of in the past, it doesn't always work as well as you'd hope it would. So that whilst you then have to make good and replant, it's not going to be simply moving what's there back and everything taking it. It'll be something that will struggle. So Hill again will leave it as an area that's very obvious. Our conservation officer still seems to be raising issues that they are concerned about the impact across the road. Again, the applicant has tried to address that. I don't think they're there. Looking at the designs, is it in character with that sort of conservation area? I'm not convinced. So I think that element, again, I would struggle to support as things stand at the moment. There's reference in the report about overshadowing of the new gardens that are going to be created. And there's even description of the fact that certain plants, even grass, wouldn't necessarily be suitable for the gardens because of the nature of the overshadowing. Well, if that's where you're starting from, that feels to me like maybe we're not quite there. So I think as things stand at the moment, the developments there. Yeah, the developments there at the moment, I would struggle to support the recommendation that's in front of us from the officers. The final thing, and you've just showed it there again, as you move from the affordables into the open market, I think it was described as you were looking for that to set the benchmark as to what the element of self-build would be. I'm concerned if that's setting the benchmark, because that feels to me like that's not necessarily going to be ideal for that development. So again, that would be something I'd be struggling with at the moment. But as I say, happy to hear the rest of the debate and see if things move on.
Thank you. Councillor Slocum. Oh, that's really strange because I've written the same things down. Apart from the issues that we've talked about, the housing need, Wedmore is an historical village, a beautiful historical village. And I have to say, when I saw the design brief, I just was thinking, something like this, I think, could really affect it. And I'm very concerned. I'm not saying they're not decent homes. I just think for this area, I think we need to be absolutely, totally sensitive what we put in there. It has to mirror what's already there in the stone-like and I get the green roofs, I get all that, but my personal view is that is a concern. And the self-build worries me as well, is what kind of design that will be, the self-build. Forgive me if I haven't quite picked up what the self-build, but knowing about self-builds, generally you can, I don't know what restriction there would be on the self-build. And just could I also say to Councillor Munt, really, I do get your point about highways. We've all, each and every one of us councillors, been here a long time, stood in front here, fighting for our patches about highways, and the professionals have told us it's okay. And generally, I have to say it has been. So it is difficult, but sometimes, you have to take on board what's given. But I would like to ask about the design, please, if that's possible.
So just looking at the street scene, so this is the front, the road frontage on the site. Obviously, this is set back behind the green space, and there is a lot of landscaping proposed. So the landscape officer is happy with this frontage. These buildings are the ones that are closest to the listed buildings because they're on the opposite side of the road in this front hand corner, and then that's the access road. So then this is the access road into the site at this point. And then these are the properties that follow the land level down, so they step down in the ridge lane. In terms of the transition, so these were the elevations, but in terms of the transition, so originally this this was the flat roof transition property, which offers also were not convinced in terms of size scale design, treatments, etc. Obviously, with a green roof, that does limit the slope of the roof that you can put on to get a green roof to grow properly. Officers felt that this solution worked because it offered the green roof, it offered the screening of the views from the elevated viewpoint, and mixed in the traditional material. It is a very contemporary approach, but if I show you where it is on the site, so on this one here, so we've just seen the road frontage here with the access road there, and then that's the property that's stepped down the ridge line. This is the orchard. There is a hedge line proposed across here, just the other side of the pavement, and round here and across here. All of these are orchard trees, so orchard planting, to make it appear that the orchard is growing up and through, which would establish through time, but admittedly not on day one because it never does. The transition property is this one here. So in terms of context, within the wider views, it wouldn't be visible from sort of these viewpoints because it's sitting behind the orchard. You would see it within the context of the site. So if you go into the site, you've got a more traditional street scene again on the southern side, and then you've got plot 24 here, which again would be a traditional unit fronting and to a degree screening views going this way. And then you've got a more contemporary unit, which is tucked back and to the side in terms of the site. So whilst it's a different approach, given that we want the self-builds to have a green roof, there are going to be limitations in design in terms of what they can do to achieve that. With the self-builds, it's outlined, so you'd get an approval of reserve asset for each of the self-builds, or even the cluster of self-builds if they have a family together relocating, which we would look at and assess each individually on their own merits. But the nature of the self-build is that the applicant designs it themselves. That's part of the requirement, is they input into the development solution. So we can't be prescriptive, but given the landscape impacts, we thought it important to limit green roofs and two-storey, so it wouldn't appear overly dominant or out-keeping. And at the bottom of the cul-de-sac, it was considered to be a good transition from the more traditional detail, and outside of the site wouldn't result in any degree of impact or harm in terms of character, which is why it was accepted by officers. But obviously, the design was subject to quite a lot of negotiation, and even with the conservation officer, who actually quite likes the green roof property, despite it being quite contemporary. But we felt it was quite a nice transitional location, and in itself didn't give rise to too many impacts.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. We've been debating this for over 2 hours now. So much information going back and forth, negative, positive, all different opinions. And I've never in 5 years asked for a site visit, never once. But on this particular occasion, I think it would be prudent to have this deferred and a site visit. I've never done that in 5 years, and I'm not really big on site visits, to be honest. On this particular occasion, the information coming back and forth is so conflicting. I don't know how other people feel, but I would propose a site visit and have that until that. I've never done that in 5 years before.
Thank you. So we have a proposal for a site visit. Do we have a seconder for that? Oh, sorry. Seconded by Councillor Filmer. Okay. So all those in favour, take the vote now. All those in favour, please vote.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Are you 15?
No, I'm not.
9 in favour.
And those against?
2 against.
Okay.
It's 11 members.
So that is any abstentions? And we need some justification policy-wise for grounds for a site visit. So Filmer.
I'm happy to suggest that the site visit would
having the access, the visual, the impact on the street scene of that there were footpaths that this was viewed from. I'm sure we would try and view from those to see the impact on the landscape of this potential development.
Are you happy? So site visit on those grounds as proposed and seconded and as carried. Thank you. Thank you for the debate, and we'll be setting a date for the site visit following this meeting. So that brings us to the end of that item. I'd like to propose a 10-minute break, comfort break, and then we will reconvene. Thank you. So we are now at agenda item 6, and that is the planning application for Lofty Heights, Blackford. Mr. Titchener, are you taking us through the application? Thank you.
So yes, it's the property proposal place of Lofty Heights, High Street, Blackford, in the parish of Wedmore. The proposal is for the erection of one dwelling with a carport. The application is before the committee due to the objection of the parish council and then just a subsequent referral through the chair and vice chair process. Just for context, so Blackford, village just in the Wedmore parish, but to the west of Wedmore. And then this is the red line here around the application site. So we are within the built-up area of Blackford. It's land which is comprised of the rear of two properties located here and here. So it's the far end part of their garden. So one of those properties is known as Lofty Heights. The other is known as Laburnum Cottage, as I understand it. So it falls within the settlement boundary. The principal residential zone is acceptable. And then, so I just want to go back through planning history because it's quite relevant to this one, just talk through how we've got to where we've got. So this is, the planning permission was granted for a dwelling on this site in 2020. So this is the above plans which show it. And at that time, it was just to be located in the rear garden of just the one property, so the Burnham Cottage here. So, that was the footprint of the dwelling. That was the garden, and that was to be retained of the existing property. And then there was to be driveway access to the side, turning area, etc. And then there's an existing property on the right hand side. So at that point, it didn't include the land to the rear. And then this just showed some cross sections of what we had in terms of the approval. So it was a 1.5 story dwelling that had accommodation within the loft space within under the eave. But it was very linear sort of footprint units with a simple pitch roof. These are the elevation plans that was approved. So it just shows that would have been frontage, so quite sort of traditional, simple sort of frontage. As I said, very linear with some roof lights. So fairly simple design. And then so that was granted in 2020. So that's just recently lapsed, as I understand it. But in terms of the considerations, we have previously granted a dwelling on the scheme. So that's kind of one of the things we have to take into account. So now we've got a larger red line than before. So it now includes part of the rear garden of this property here. So we've received a revised scheme effectively. So they are still proposing the erection of a single dwelling. The site is now larger and includes some of the rear garden of the Heights. So this is a revised floor plan. This is not the design that we are asking members to approve. This is what came in as part of the application originally. So when this application landed some months ago, so we see a footprint of quite different design to the previous scheme. So, and this is something we felt as officers we were unable to support. So it was a dwelling of considerably larger footprint. So we considered to be in very close proximity to the neighbouring dwelling. So extended right over to the boundary, whereas previously we had the driveway space there. So that was felt to have unacceptable impact, and that because they had objected. It included accommodation over 2 floors, extending sort of very much into the rear of the site. And then these were the elevations. Whilst that looks sort of linear, that's actually the sort of the bit that's set back much further into the site, given it's a kind of sort of Z-shaped sort of footprint. So the appearance to the street scene would have been of a sort of quite sort of different type of design, quite sort of for the context. There are quite a lot of traditional properties in Blackford, quite a lot of cottages, quite varied design, but traditional features, particularly in Little Boulder Park, are more prominent. And officers considered that the provision of the sort of the undercroft parking, the big fenestration, the sort of dog leg of the footprint was not conducive to the street scene. So we pushed back on this. We also questioned whether it's really deliverable to have an undercroft parking, given there is small level change between the site and the road, but not considerable. And again, this was just some cross section, so you can see looking sort of on a sort of north-south back of this, just the side of the property, and not a particularly big plot, I would say. So the plot takes the dwelling taking up most of the footprint of the plot, and it would have included this large laid gable, which would have been particularly visible when coming along the street scene. So as you approach, the main approach is along here from the centre of the village. So that's a very contemporary design, perhaps a little bit out of place in the more traditional design street scene that is in the surrounding area. So we have now got a revised scheme. So this is part of the plans that we are asking members to approve. So effectively, the starting point for discussions with the applicant was we previously consented the footprint like this in this broad location. The principle of adding some additional accommodation to the rear plot is broadly acceptable, but put it where the footprint of the existing management enables it to be drawn away from the property on the right hand side, so that the impacts are similar to what was previously considered acceptable. So we have an L-shaped footprint, but where the additional accommodation is achieved by going into the rear of the plot. We no longer have undercroft parking. We have just 2 parking spaces provided to the side, and returning areas are much more akin to the previous scheme that was considered acceptable. So this is a revised ground floor plan, just showing those 2 parking spaces in a bit more detail. Highways had reviewed the scheme, so they've looked at the proposals. So one of the concerns they had before was about the lack of turning space. They wanted cars to be able to turn within the site and pull out in forward gear. We've now got that. We didn't have that with the first iteration. They've taken a view of the size of the visibility displays and what was considered acceptable at the previous scheme. They note that they fall below standing vice. That was also noted in the previous scheme, but account was taken of the observed vehicle speeds at the time, the low level of traffic passing, and the low speeds, and it wasn't considered unacceptable to have a reduced scale visibility display. So I was on the basis that that sort of level of display was previously considered acceptable. Again, stated the same conclusions here. Object to the original version when it came in. So they want conditions to secure the provision of the access, controls over the use of parking and turning areas, provision of construction management plan and measures to improve surface water on the highway, and all those conditions would be imposed. And just in terms of the design, so this is the front elevation. So as members can see, it's much more akin to what was previously given consent. So we've got a much more simpler appearance, much more traditional scale windows, which are more akin to the kind of windows you might see in a sort of older cottage type property, and a much more balanced frontage. So something that's not going to be quite so jarring on the street scene, given the sort of older nature of the properties in the locality. So the materials include the use of ragstone walling, brick coins, just on the detailing on the edges, render on sides and rear, powder coated aluminium windows, and clay tiled roofing. So as I stated, it's much more akin to the 2020 approval, and the main difference really is just the securing some additional accommodation through projection to the rear. Just a cross section again, you can see a little bit of a slope down across the site, just out to the road here. So this is the sort of effectively the additional element of the scheme coming out. Then we sort of a roof on the end. And now these images show some cross sections. So we've got some cross sections of the internal internal parts of the proposal. So there are still roof lights in the roof, as they were with the previous scheme. These are predominantly high level roof lights, so from you can see in terms of sort of standing heights, they are above head height level. So that's done deliberately, effectively, not to project views towards any neighbouring properties, but to project them upwards, but still just to allow some light in. So primary in directions will not give rise to unacceptable amenity impacts. There is one larger roof light on the west elevation. That is to be partially obscure glazed in the lower part, just to obscure views there. I understand some concern had been expressed by a neighbour that's to the north, beyond, so that would have some of the high level roof lights sort of oriented in their direction. But we would consider the use of high level windows such as these in itself wouldn't give rise to impacts of overlooking loss of privacy. So we wouldn't consider that to be a basis on which to recommend refusal. This image just shows the dwelling within the context of the street scene. So in terms of heights, there's a little bit of transition, so slightly higher, just coming down to the two-storey properties, and therefore is not considered to be out of character. And then just some photographs, just of the site in context. So this is the application site here. So there is this existing hedgerow along the frontage. That's the property that's on the right-hand side, the one that we're trying to pull the scheme away from. So because it would have projected to the front, so we've had some over-dominating effects on those views from those front windows. This is looking back up, so that's the application site in there, just on the left. Just looking into the site, you can see quite a varied property type, but they're all sort of slightly older, of some character. Again, just a slightly closer look in to the existing hedgerow and the verge boundary. Again, looking back down the street alongside the existing hedgerow, and then just photographs within the site, which is existing rear garden present. Again, more internal photographs. So that just shows the view towards the neighbour to the rear. So I mentioned about those high level windows because there is this property beyond the application site, but we would consider that, like I said, the use of those high level roof lights would preclude any overlooking. Photos, and then just ecology and just a couple of matters. So originally there was phosphate raised in the issue. That's now been resolved. There is the proposal would connect to mains drainage that would drain outside the catchment of the Ramsar. There is a condition proposed that the site be secured to mains drains only, so that would effectively address that issue. There were ecology surveys undertaken, and they have recommended certain controls. So they want controls on external lighting, vegetation removal, submission of a habitat mitigation enhancement plan, plus some informatives, because for example, the hedgerow up front will require some removal to facilitate some of the works, and that will need to be re-established partly after. There is an archaeology condition proposed that would be by constitute, that would be secured. And there just needs to be, just by way of an update, a very minor drafting change to the reasons for conditions 3 and 9. So those are pre-commencement conditions. The regulations require us to set out why they are pre-commencement conditions. So there's just a little bit of additional wording we need to add into those conditions, setting out that these need to be pre-commencement conditions. So that tends to go at the start of the reasons, basically saying this is a pre-commencement just to make sure we've done our legal compliance, but it does not change the emphasis of those positions. So overall, we consider the revisions bring the scheme closer to that previously considered acceptable, so now satisfactory in terms of design and amenity. And we don't consider there's any other matters which cannot be addressed by conditions, so we are recommending an approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Titchener. We have one speaker objecting to this application, and that is Mr. Marlowe. I'd like to invite Mr. Marlowe to come to the table, please, and we'll start the 3 minutes when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you for that summary. That's very useful. We've lived in the neighbouring property in Applecroft, which is to the north of the proposal, for about 32 years. And we would like to raise 3 concerns for your consideration regarding this application. The first is the loss of amenity. My house, garden and patio areas will be in a deep shadow during the winter months. And that's been confirmed by the sunlight modelling presented by the developer in their application. The case officer has reviewed this and concluded that this loss of immunity is acceptable. This is no worse than the shadow cast from the existing planning permission granted in 2020. But with respect, I think that conclusion is wrong, as the proposed plans shows the north section of the building being built in effect as an addition to the back of the 2020 permitted build area. This area is going to be built on the garden area of Lofty Heights. The Lofty Heights garden was not part of the 2020 permission, and this garden previously provided a buffer between my property and the new build. As the proposal is the same height as the 2020 permission, and as it's 7 meters closer to my property, it follows that it will cast a more extensive shadow over my property, resulting in a gloomy prospect for the winter months, resulting in a loss of light for several months. It must therefore cause a greater loss of immunity due to this loss of light when compared to the planning permission granted in 2020, and there must be some loss of immunity associated with that. Furthermore, no comparative modelling has been presented by the developer to show that their proposal will not cause a greater loss of light and immunity for my property than the 2020 proposal. This additional loss of immunity will result in my property being cast into a deep shadow during the winter months and low light levels on the ground floor rooms of my house. My south-facing sunroom is going to become my shadow room. I would ask you to consider if the proposal should be permitted, as it's likely going to be to the detriment of the use of our house. The second concern is that there will be a loss of privacy. As the case officer pointed out, there's a large, partially obscured 2-meter dormer window on the living area, which forms the northern extension. And that's an extension of the 2020 permission. This window is close to the boundary of my property and will overlook my garden and house and outside areas we use. The third planning concern is that the scale and design of the proposal is inappropriate for the site and its location. The proposal includes a modernist or contemporary design of an oak frame that's fully glazed on its west gable, which is out of keeping with the additional traditional housing and the existing planning permission for a traditional dormer bungalow. Besides its design, the bungalow is at scale, being twice the size of the neighbouring properties and the 2020 permission.
I will have to stop you there.
Okay, and it's elevated as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. There were a number of issues raised there. Would you like to respond to them, please?
Just in terms of the first point about the sort of drafting report saying that there's no greater impact versus vis-a-vis the consented scheme, I think there's clearly perhaps some clumsy wording in the report, because we are looking at a slightly different scheme. It does project towards the neighbour. It will have a slightly different effect overall. In terms of our assessment, however, though, we haven't got to the point where we would say it would have a significant unacceptable impact on the neighbour. And I think part of the reason why, even though it's projecting, in terms of the design of the roof, I like to come to the end to some of the plans. I think that's why certain design choices were made, and in discussions with the applicants, that's why we've ended up with things like such a half pit roof on the element that's closest to the boundary, effectively, so as to limit the heights and the highest points of the roof where it gets closest to the neighbouring property. So that has an effect of limiting overshadowing, and there is still a separation distance from the rear of the property to the boundary. Winter months are obviously the months when the sun is at its absolute lowest, so when overshadowing effects tend to be at their absolute greatest. So it's not to say that there aren't some small impacts that may occur at certain times of day, at certain specific times of year. But having taken account of the design, the separation from the neighbour, we would consider those impacts are of such are of a scale that would warrant the refusal of the application. In terms of the privacy, I think I'd already touched on the roof lights. So if I come to the relevant plan, the speaker was referring to the sort of the larger window That's sort of on the west elevation, so where this looks towards one of the other neighbouring properties. And the applicant's property would be sort of behind here. But that's one of the reasons why, even though views from that would be quite oblique toward the applicant's property, that's why a decision was taken to recommend that be obscure glaze and the condition imposed on the provision as such. All the other roof lights, these are the ones that would look towards the applicant's property, are high level ones. They are above head height, so they are only giving views up. They are not giving any views over neighbouring properties. And then just lastly, just touching on size, scale and design, I think that's a concern that we shared with the original scheme. We felt that the original scheme wasn't in proportion. It was effectively trying to take up too much of a relatively modest plot. So we tried to draw the scheme back in terms of its size and appearance, so that what you see from the street scene is much more akin to what we've previously approved. So any additional development is effectively going to be screened by the front facade and is going to be behind. So through the changes to the scheme, this is now delivering something which is more in keeping with the character of the local area. Thank you.
Can I start off with the questions? Can you remind us of the distance between the boundary of the application site and the neighbour, please?
Might need to bear with me. I might need to scale off this because I haven't got the measurement to hand. I would suggest that given that is the length of a car and a parking space, that we're talking about 5 metres, because a parking space would be at least 4.8 metres. So we're talking a fairly similar sort of distance. So we're talking about 5 metre separation from there to the boundary. And I guess what we don't show on this plan is the actual position of the neighbour's property. So maybe if I get, that's probably a slightly more helpful plan in terms of establishing the impact on the neighbour's property, which is here. There is actually sort of some separation even beyond the boundary to the neighbour's property again. So I would suggest that you're always going to get some overshadowing just by the fact you've got a fence in between, which will be about 2 metres in height. But in terms of the impacts, we consider actually that's likely to be relatively limited in terms of the times that it take place in times of day.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Slocum. This may not be relevant, but it says the applicant does not own the land and it's still in the ownership of the property of Lofty Heights. I just want to know if that was still correct, because would it make any difference to the?
So that was raised in correspondence representations on the application, and it's relevant in terms of whether the correct certificates have been signed as part of the application form. So the applicant has to declare whether they're the owner. If they're not the owner, they have to serve notice on the correct owners. That was picked up that they weren't the actual owners at the time, and they had to go back out, reserved notices and redo the certificates as part of that. We're now satisfied that the information we've got is that the correct procedures have gone through. It's effectively a procedural point. You don't need to own a site to put a planning application in, essentially. You just need to make sure we've done the correct things in terms of procedures. We're satisfied that that has been done in this case.
That's the third one.
And if I could just ask for some extra clarification on the 2 points actually that Mr. Fisher did partly address. The extra shadowing, you had the picture that showed us the extension as to where could you indicate on that how much of that is now the bit that's beyond what was the original permission? Whether that is the hip bit or whether it's more than the hip bit.
Well, so this building here, the footprint of the previous building is effectively a rectangle. So it broadly follows the line of this here. So everything that is new is this square at the end. So that is all except moving in the direction of the neighbouring property to the rear. So that's all new. I guess in terms of just our assessment of it, even though it is projecting, the separation distance, the design of the roof is such that we would not consider that going to lead to significant loss of amenity. And you have to take into account things like the distances there, the extent of the external amenity space that the neighbours benefit from. The sun, I guess, is going to travel in an arc sort of like this throughout the day. So we are on the southern side of the neighbour, but we are talking about the times of year when, if we are talking about winter sun, it is also the time of the year when people are less likely to be outside enjoying their gardens, rather than the times of year when people are getting most enjoyment out of gardens, when we would have even increased concern.
And the second, was just to clarify the obscure window. Could you, I think I'm right in understanding, is it that the sort of bottom 2/3 is going to be the bit that's obscure, and it's just the little bit at the top that is not obscured?
That's correct. So yeah, it's that, you're absolutely right. It's the bottom 2/3 that would be obscured. The top bit would be unobscured in the same way that those same roof lights there would be unobscured. Thank you.
Councillor Bolt.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure you had a plan there with elevations of that building as against the neighbour behind, to see what height it is against the. Yeah, I think you went past it. I thought that there was one there that showed the neighbour directly behind. Oh, it's that one? No, that shows the front, sorry.
Yeah, but that just shows the street. So that's the properties on the sort of right and left hand side effectively. It doesn't show the property in behind.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have a cross section that shows relative position.
Would that one be in scale, the one you just shown, which shows the roof of the property behind?
But that doesn't show the roof of the property behind. I mean, it's a drawing that's drawn to scale, but it doesn't show that the one in behind. If you're trying to work out the relationship of that property.
That's right, but the height against, whether it's overbearing or.
Yeah, we haven't got that. We haven't got a long enough cross section effectively to do that. We're basically what we have been able to do as part of our site visit is just make that judgment ourselves as officers in this case.
Thank you.
Any more questions? In which case, councillor Hendry.
One quick question. I didn't quite grasp what Councillor Fromm yourself to talk about the windows. Am I right in saying that there's no clear windows facing the bungalow next door? Is that, did I get that right or wrong? The speaker here spoke very passionately about private space, etc., which I actually agree with, by the way. Is there any windows on the side that faces the bungalow clear, or are they obscured? I've got a little bit of a slight conversation there.
In terms of the objector who lives to the rear, so the windows that are directly looking in their direction are these high level roof lights, the ones that are above head height.
Right.
Then you've got this window which is looking to the side, so it's not looking directly towards them. So when I said it sort of has an oblique angle, it's sort of looking sort of, you know, almost like a 45-degree angle to get there. That's the window that is obscured for the lower 2/3 of it. So the only window then you're left with is again another high level part of it. So the only ones that look directly towards the neighbour are these ones. These kind of have an oblique view, and that would be it. There aren't any other first floor windows that are looking directly towards that affected neighbour.
So while I actually take the chap's point exactly, I do feel for them, I really do, because I understand the situation wholeheartedly. But unfortunately, the points that are being raised are probably not strong enough to actually stop the development going ahead. I would just like to know that I do have to feel, because I can see the situation, but perhaps the views are not strong enough to stop it.
It's not really anything to add, but I have to say, I'm always worried about new properties going in and causing loss of light, loss of amenity to the neighbour. It can affect the whole way of people's lives. I'm not going to say the obvious, but it can. And can you just reassure me that light is not going to affect them? Because it's always a big thing for everyone dealing with something like this, where somebody's lived in been able to see all the way around their property, and all of a sudden they get a black hole.
Judge how the neighbour is going to feel about this situation. You know, that's all we can do, I guess, as officers, is try and design or recommend approval on schemes where we feel the impacts have been properly assessed and considered. And I guess we've got to that view because of factors such as separation distance, and the design of the roof. That, is it going to lead to a significant effect? And
And in our view, it's not because of those factors. I think it would be much more different if we were pushing the development right up to the boundary and we had first floor roofscapes right up on the boundary. That's a much harsher impact. Here we've got some separation. We've got a roof design which doesn't have a full gable right up, and so it's sort of drawn back in. And because of that, we have to come to a balanced view. But our view is that it's not going to give rise to significant effects. So that may not make the objective feel any better about the situation. I get that. We could just make our own recommendations based on our assessment.
Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thank you. I've just got the concern on the original one in 2020, that basically was an oblong. Now it's L shape, and the L of the shape is longer than that car, so that would have been an extra, probably without looking at a scale, call it 8 meters, so 8 and 5. When you start adding that up, because I'm getting the impression that that is on a slightly raised bit of land, and that's what I'm concerned about. The cross section is that dominant, and is it overbearing? That is my main concern there, because if it's at the same level, great. But other than that, I can see that it will be blocking the light, especially during winter.
I just wanted to come in terms of the light assessment that was done as part of the planning application. So as part of the planning application for the size, shape and scale of the building, we have got shadow plans. It wasn't unfortunately part of the presentation, but we have got shadow plans for what shadowing will look like on the 20th of March at 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock and 5 o'clock. What shadowing will look like on the 21st of June, again 9, 12 and 5. What shadowing looks like on the 23rd of September, 9, 12 and 5. And then what shadowing looks like on the 21st of December at 9 and 12, but not 5 because it's already dark by then. So in terms of when the shadowing creeps over the boundary, because that's the point, it will start hitting the patio and then subsequently the windows of the England property, all of the lighting ahead of the 21st of December, so up to the 23rd of June, is all within the boundary of the applicant. So it will be between sort of after the 23rd of June onwards and the 21st of December where you will have some overshadowing of that area. So given the extent of overshadowing and the nature of that use and that time of year, officers have made the judgment that actually for the rest of the year, it's all within the boundary of the applicant's site. It doesn't cause an impact outside of the applicant's site, but it is potentially causing some overshadowing beyond the applicant's boundary after the 23rd of September. And the 21st of December, it does cause some overshadows to the patio area and some of the windows. But given the time of year, given the size of the neighbour's site and the rest of the garden they have to enjoy, that wouldn't be overshadowed. You know, it's balanced in terms of the effect isn't considered so significant with recommended refusal.
I think it's just two issues. That's the time of the year that you actually want the sunlight. And if we don't get enough of it, then that would be described as exactly my concern.
Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. In view of all the conversations that we've just had between us all, the presentation, by the way, which was first class, as much as I do sympathise with these people, and I really do, there's actually no valid reason to actually stop this and not let it go ahead. To use the phrase, opens for Monday, it actually ticks all the boxes. In this case, it actually does, and there's no legal reason or valid reason to stop this. So, unfortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, I have to propose to grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you, and that is with the slight changes to conditions 3 and 9, which makes it clear it's a pre-commencement condition. Is that right at the start? Okay, thank you, Councillor Hendry. We have a proposer to grant the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Grimes has seconded. So all in favour, please show.
6, 7, 8, 9 in favour.
Any against? The 2.
Sorry, I was against 1, 2 against. Sorry.
Any abstentions? I think that's all, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's
Okay,
carried.
so that's carried. So we then go on to the final application of the day, which is agenda item 7 on page 119, regarding, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, but Gelosia Close in Western Highlands. So Ms. Elvey, if you'd like to take us through the application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Okay, so this is the application at 6 Gelosia Close. That's something else that I don't know. Western Zoyland near Bridgewater. The proposal is for a single-storey extension to the rear and a dormer extension to the north, which is the rear roof slope. Since the publication of the report, the Western Zoyland Parish Council have since submitted their comments. That's also an objection, so I'll just read it out. So Western Zoyland Parish Council support the representation submitted by neighbours objecting to this proposed development from numbers 8 Gelosia Close and 38 Monmouth Road. The objection is based on overlooking, loss of privacy and likely overbearing impact. Also, since the publication of the report, it's been noted that whilst the report refers to a condition about having biodiversity enhancement, that was missed. So it's just verbally confirming that, you know, that is to be added in the recommendation. Okay, so these are the main policies in the local plan that are relevant to this planning application. So the site is in a residential area of the village of Western Zoyland. And as previously described, it seeks consent for the erection of a single-storey extension and dormer to the rear elevation. The site outlined in red, and then shaded in grey on the site plan, you can see where the proposed extensions are going. So before us is the existing and proposed plans. So the existing floor plan, you can see there's currently a conservatory to the rear. So the proposal includes an extension that replaces the conservatory. And then in the loft space, that's to be converted to create a bedroom and an ensuite. So the existing property is semi-detached bungalow. And with the proposals, the dormer would project from the ridge of the main property by approximately 0.3 metres. So you can sort of see that in these drawings. So then we move on to the site photos. So indicated by the red arrow, you can see where the application site is. So this is a view of the front of the property. So those properties there, you can see are on the sort of neighbouring street. And then we move on to photos of the rear. So this is the conservatory that's to be replaced. And then views as you're stood with your back to the rear of the property, looking out towards the neighbouring properties that are at the rear. And again, as you sort of pan across to the left. So in terms of the design, it is acknowledged that the dormer is above the ridge line. However, due to the modest scale of the proposed extension, this is not considered to be visually dominant. The single-storey extension is also considered to be of an appropriate size and scale, and finished in matching and complementary materials. In respect of residential amenity, there are a number of other bungalows in the vicinity, such as those to the north that can be seen in the photos, that already have first floor dormers. Therefore, whilst the proposal will introduce overlooking from this property, it's not considered to be of an unacceptable level. It should also be noted that one of the windows, the window that's nearest the boundary of the dormer window, is to serve a bathroom. So naturally would then be on skill plate. In terms of other considerations, the Highways recommend standing advice, and it's considered that this is compliant with that. In terms of ecology, as previously mentioned, the opposite recommendation would include a condition to ensure that there's some biodiversity enhancement secured, possibly a bird box or a bat box, whichever's suitable for this location. And then an informative would also be imposed to remind the applicant of the legal protection afforded to certain species. And then the application site is in flood zone 3. However, a householder flood risk assessment has been submitted, and a condition is included in the recommendation to secure any sort of flood resilience measures that were identified in that FRA. So overall, it's considered that the proposal is compliant with the relevant local plan policies, and therefore the officer recommendation is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jay, can I just interrupt?
Oh, yeah.
Is the biodiversity condition willing to be agreed between the officer and the chair, vice chair?
Yes, it would be.
It will be delegated. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 speakers for this application. I'd like to invite you all to the table, please. Thank you. And you have 3 minutes from when you'd like to start.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am the neighbour that is attached to Gelosia Close. I live there on my own. I note that the case officer for this application has made several subjective assessments in the committee meeting report. With regards to visual amenity, the case officer has stated that the design is subservient to the main property. In addition, the dormer projecting further than the ridge of the existing property has been described by the case officer as a novel addition to the street scene and not considered to be a visually dominant feature, and would not erode the character of the property or the surrounding area. Dormers designed to project above the ridgeline are generally considered to be unacceptable. This proposal is out of character and out of keeping with the surrounding area and will have a significant derogatory impact on my property. When taking into account residential amenity, the case officer has stated that a 5.9 projection is not considered to be unacceptable, as it would not give rise to unacceptable overshadowing or overdominance. However, this additional 2.9 metres beyond the existing conservatory will then extend a total of nearly 50% of the entire boundary along my garden, creating significant imposition on my open space at the rear of the property, patio, and the 3 rooms at the rear of the property. In conjunction with the increased height of over 3 metres and the brick construction, and considering the gardens are north facing, which exacerbates the overshadowing, I wholeheartedly disagree with the case officer's opinion regarding the impact on residential amenity. This will create unacceptable overshadowing and it will create unacceptable overdominance. The case officer has concluded that this proposal would have no adverse impact on the locality or residential amenity. However, there are no other bungalows in Gelosia Close that have extensions along the boundary. In fact, there are none in the entire village that have been designed in this way. It therefore comes as no surprise that Western Zoyland Parish Council have also lodged an objection to this proposal. I feel that the impact of this proposal is too detrimental to my property and neighbouring properties, and the conclusion of the case officer's committee meeting report does not reflect the issues that this proposed extension will create.
Thank you. Now let's call Gillian Allen. Please to the table. Three minutes from when you start.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me have a voice this afternoon and expressing my feelings about the proposed planning at the back of our property. Our views around this planning application at 6 Gelosia Close is to protect our privacy and address an overlooking issue if this was to proceed. Firstly, an erection of a single-storey extension and a dormer extension to that of the north of this property would mean the occupants would have a direct view into our now private small garden. We spend a lot of time in the garden during the summer months. We also live at the back of our property, for example, bedroom, bathroom, living room, conservatory, and this would mean our privacy would be lost. Can I quote policy D25 of the local plan, which states, consideration will be given to the extent of the proposal could result in unacceptable impacts, and this for us would include loss of privacy, overlooking, visual dominance, and an overall living conditions would change if this went ahead. Our small garden that backs onto 6 Gelosia Close has a limited space between us as it stands now, and if this proposed planning went ahead, we feel it would violate our right within our property as it would make us feel even more enclosed. Although it states in policy D20 that properties in the surrounding area have dormer windows, there aren't any that face directly into our garden and our property or go above the ridge of the existing roof, therefore out of character for this area. Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to call David Bartholomew, please.
Uh,
3 minutes when you wish to start. Thank you.
My name is David Bartholomew. I'm the application living in Gillow Close. I grew up in Western Zoreland and lived here for over 30 years. I was fortunate enough to purchase my late grandfather's house when his health deteriorated and had to move into a care home. My sister also lives in Western Zoreland with 2 very young nephews whom I'm able to support. I live and work in Western Zoreland and like being able to walk and cycle to work whenever possible. I love living in a village environment, and the sense of community in Western Zoreland is great. As you can see, my hope is to turn this 2-bedroom property into a 3-bedroom home, which will allow my partner and I to create a family in a village environment. With the current housing market and economic climate, converting this property is the only viable way we're able to afford a family home. At the rear of the property, there's currently a dilapidated conservatory, which you've obviously seen, which does leak and is beyond economic repair. The ground floor single-storey extension is to replace the existing conservatory, which is only marginally bigger than the current footprint. My application also includes dormer extension to the north of the property, one master bedroom and bathroom. The bathroom will have obscured glass as standard. The bedroom will be fitted with blinds to allow for my own privacy, and being a bedroom will be of low traffic anyway. I have no desire to be looking into people's properties or gardens. The windows will be to allow for natural light only. I would like to draw your attention to the property surrounding area, which had already been mentioned. The majority of properties to the rear of me already have dormer roof extensions, 2 of which overlook my garden and into my property. Multiple other properties of similar construction in the immediate surrounding area also have dormer conversions, which also overlook other properties in the area. I hope you can look on my application favourably and allow me to create my family home so we can stay and have a family in this wonderful village. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Can you respond to some of the issues that were raised, please?
Sure.
Absolutely, especially around overshadowing and modelling that's been done.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just start from the top of my notes. So in terms of the design, yes, it is acknowledged that the projection above the ridge is, novel, as I've said in my report, but that projection is only, I think it's 27.5 centimetres. So because of that minimal projection, it's considered to be acceptable. Whilst it is a new addition to the street scene, because it is on a modest scale, we do not consider it to be unacceptable in terms of its visual amenity. So moving on to the potential impacts on residential amenity. So let's start with overlooking. So in terms of the distances we're looking at here, so this isn't, obviously there's no scale bar on this, but I scaled it off the plan. So in terms of, if you were to look at the distance from say here to about here is 20 metres. So that helps to sort of give an idea about the distances we're talking about. And whilst I appreciate that's wall to wall, it's that combination of that distance, the fact that there are other dormer bungalows, dormer windows, and also that you can insert a dormer window to the rear of your property under PD. Plus, one of the windows being obscure glazed, is that combination that for us as officers feel that it's acceptable in terms of overlooking. In respect to the single story extension, we don't have concerns about overlooking from that because it is single story. In terms of overshadowing and over dominance, we've not had any shadowing modelling done. It's not standard for most applications, especially householders. The height of the single story extension, so it's 3.05, sorry, so 3 metres 5 centimetres in height. Permitted development allows you to do an extension that's 3 metres in height. Whilst it does project nearly 6 metres. And that couldn't be done under PD. There is a householder prior approval, which would allow you to apply for permission to do an extension of that projection. So that would allow for a neighbour consultation. It's not like a full planning application. So considering that fallback as well, and the fact that there's that existing conservatory and the height, we don't consider that to be unacceptable. So I'm just trying to think what other points were raised. Yeah, okay, so that's everything, yeah.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Slocum. It's not so much a question, really. I think it's, I have to say, it's always a shame when a bungalow has to be changed into a chalet house. I think we haven't got enough bungalows. As you know, as you get on past your sell by date, you realise how significant bungalows are. So that is always a sadness. And I do appreciate, it does look very dominant, but I can also appreciate it's only 2 bedrooms now, and it needs to be changed into 3 bedrooms for a family home. And I understand that. So I'm a little bit concerned about the dominance of it, in compared to the visual. Can you just tell me the space again between it's a semi-detached, isn't it? So the neighbour, what is the dominance from the neighbour's back garden? If this is in the back of the front, sorry, I should have got that.
No, that's okay. So this is to the rear. You're talking about single story extension.
Yeah,
So both bits to the rear. I can show you the photos again. So where this conservatory is, it's replacing that.
That's secondary.
Given that a dormer, I think we can say this comes under PD.
Not this dormer because it projects above the ridge, but you can do a
That's-
dormer
yeah, that's-
on the ridge. Yeah.
It's only marginally, Bob, it's not a great deal. This application is not actually an unrealistic plan to do, but a lot of other houses round about in bungalows have actually done already. This type of house on these estates, we've had these applications before, and very, very few get turned down. The ones that do get turned down, I'm sure you remember, Don, we've had some who've got a huge bulk in the back, but this is not. It's not like that. They very seldom get turned down. I'm not really quite sure it's why it's actually got this far, to be honest. There is no proper reason to come in and say, yes, this has to be stopped because X, Y, and Z. He's not been unrealistic in what he wants, given, as I just said, that there are other properties round about which he's just described, which are almost identical only in size and character and bulk.
Thank you, councillor Filmer.
Yeah, it's unusual, but I'm going to disagree with Councillor Henry. So my concern with this is the design and bulk, to be honest. If I understand completely dormers are permitted development, this is, I think you said 30 centimetres above the roof line, so in old money that's a foot and a bit. So it will project, it will be seen from the front, and certainly I think one of the photographs you showed us show there are views from the side which may well pick up on it as well. So my concern with it at the moment is the sheer size of it. I don't have a problem with the principle of a dormer on the back. I don't like square box dormers, but you have to live with them. But simply the fact that it is going above the ridge and the size of it, I think the bulk on the back of that property is considerable. That is going to have an impact on the next door neighbour. I can't see how we can say it won't have an impact of something that size. And yeah, you can see a dormer there, which is what, a foot and a bit below the ridge height. So it has less of an impact. The other thing I'd like to just check, I think the conservatory looks like it's about 3 metres at the moment. So height wise, that's not too different. But it's coming more this way. So again, I can see where the neighbour is a little bit concerned. Could you just confirm in terms of the going next to the boundary, you were saying you can have 3 metres in height with PD. Is that right up against a boundary?
Yeah.
Okay, so in which case I think the single story element, I don't think we've got grounds to raise too many concerns about, but from my own point of view, I couldn't support it as it stands at the moment because of the sheer size and bulk of the dormer upstairs.
Mr. Clayton.
Yes, I don't think this is setting a precedent in any way. As we can see from the surrounding areas, a lot of people do this. And I think the big thing for me is this will actually help create a family home. And that's very significant for me. To keep this property in the family is second to none. I don't think it's out of keeping. I don't think a foot extra on the roof is that significant. If it will make that family home, perfect family home for this people.
The Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you just confirm that we're talking about extending this above the ridge height? Is that because there's not enough room if it's kept down to the same height as the ridge?
Yeah, I think so. Mhm.
It is. That's all I was concerned about, that if there was enough room, then why would you want to take it to the ridge? But obviously, if you can't, then that answers the question.
I think from the floor plan of the first floor, maybe if you can just indicate where the staircase is. So it's on the triangle. Sorry. So basically, the staircase. So from the ground floor, you can see the staircase goes up that way, then it twists up that way. So the bit where the head clearance is for the staircase is right at the ridge, so that's the highest point you can possibly get to. Under building regs, there's a minimum height you need if you're putting the staircase in. So they need to elevate the height of the door. In terms of the street scene, I appreciate there is a step up in terms of where the dormer's going. There is also a step in from the side of the dormer. So whilst you may get, you would see sort of a thin line along the top of the ridge in this photo. If you go back to the previous one. So you would see the edge of the dormer from that view, but it is set in from that edge. So it's not a flank edge on that street scene, it's set in and set away. If you can go back to the layout plan. So the dormer on the back, show where it's set in on that side. So effectively that view then in the street scene would be sort of an angled view. So you would see the dormer, but it would be an edge of the dormer rather than the full extent of it.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to confirm, actually, that, that's why they were doing it. In which case, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Grimes. And we do have two other speakers, Councillor Hendry and then Councillor Slocum. So I'll note that.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually about to do what Councillor Grimes has just done. Because there are a lot of things being said here. There's, as I have to state again, there's no boundaries for turning this down. Above the ridge height we're talking about, to be honest with you, is the size of that sheet of paper. That's all we're talking about here. And it's not enough to block a man or a family wants to stay in the village, work in the village, is a local man, to make his house from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom to a family home. It's not an unreasonable request. And from the street scene, you don't actually see much other than the size of that sheet of paper sticking up to the top of the roof. So yes, I fully support, and I'm happy to second Councillor Grimes. Thank you.
Well, we are here to look at planning, so I guess we can't look at every moral aspect, can we? But I mean, we never get nothing done. But could we go to the picture where it shows the back garden, where it shows a dormer in the back garden, opposite the neighbour's back garden? Not that one, I think there's another one.
Yeah, so there's two. So that where the scaffolding is, that's a dormer. I don't know if that's clear.
No, it's not very clear.
Okay, so that is a dormer.
Yeah.
And then there's also
this
one here.
I think what I'm trying to say is, when there's a dormer that just comes off the ridge slightly, it doesn't look like a big lump. And I know that there's years and years ago, there was one down near us, and I know everybody said after, oh gosh, that looks so terrible. And I do get it, what you're saying, but I just think if that was a little bit less, the idea of that coming off the top ridge, it really is quite big and bulky. And when you look at them near you and see them, you realise how ugly it looks. And I just, if you're really saying then the applicant can't bring it down to that height, can't bring it off the ridge because he wouldn't be able to do the stairs. So that's what we're really saying. So there's no option at all. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we debated the pros and cons. We have a proposer and a seconder to grant permission as per the officer's recommendation. Will all those in favour please show?
Oh, with the condition, the biodiversity condition.
Oh, yes, sorry. With the addition, are you happy to accept the biodiversity condition to be agreed in consultation with myself and councillor Martin? All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in favour.
And those against?
1, 2 against.
I think that's everybody, but yeah, there's no extensions there. Okay, so that is carried. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you all for your contributions and debates. Thank you.